The Great Race. The story of Chinese New Year. Many, many years ago in China, there lived an important man known as the Jade Emperor. It was his birthday, and he wanted to know how old he was. He decided that there needed to be a way to measure time. He called all of the animals and told them that there was to be a great race. It would be a swimming race. The first 12 animals to complete the race would be the winners, and they would each get a year of the zodiac named after them. All of the animals got into position along the riverbank. The rat and the cat were not good swimmers and were very worried about the race. Then they noticed the big, strong ox standing nearby, and, as they were very clever, asked, "Ox, would you be so kind as to take us across the river with you?" "Of course," answered the good-hearted ox. "Just climb onto my back and I'll take you safely across." The rat and the cat jumped up onto the ox's back and they began to make their way across the river. They were quite excited to see that the ox was leading the race. Just as they were about to reach the other side, the cheeky rat pushed the cat into the water, then jumped from the ox's back onto his head and leapt from his head onto the riverbank. "Well done!" cried the Jade Emperor to the brazen rodent. "You are the first to cross the river. I shall name the first year of the zodiac after you, rat." The poor kind ox had been cheated out of first place, so the second year of the zodiac was named after him. Shortly after, the tiger arrived panting at the riverbank. He took third place. Next to arrive was the rabbit. Now, the rabbit couldn't actually swim, but he was very clever and had managed to make it across the river by hopping on some stepping stones. When he could no longer find any stones to jump from, he leapt onto a passing log and let the log carry him the rest of the way. The Jade Emperor was so impressed with the rabbit's quick thinking that he named the fourth year of the zodiac after him. Just then, a dragon swooped in. "Why are you late, dragon, when you can fly?" asked the Jade Emperor, puzzled. "Well," answered the kind dragon, "I could see that some of my competitors were thirsty, so I had to stop to make some rain for them to drink. Then I noticed the rabbit perched on a log in the water, so I blew a big puff of wind to help him along his way to the shore." "That was certainly very kind of you," said the Jade Emperor, clearly impressed. "I will name the fifth year of the zodiac after you." The Jade Emperor then lifted his head. He could hear a noise. It was the sound of a horse's whinny. Just as he was about to name the sixth zodiac year after the horse, a sly snake wrapped itself around the horse's hooves. This caused the horse to stop and struggle, allowing for the snake to slither ahead and claim sixth place. The poor horse took seventh place. Promptly, a raft drew up, carrying a goat, a monkey, and a rooster. They explained to the emperor that they had sailed together. The rooster had found the raft, and the goat and monkey had cleared the tangled weeds from it so that they could sail the raft to shore. The emperor was impressed with their teamwork. "I shall name the eighth year of the zodiac after the goat," he proclaimed. "The ninth will be named after the monkey, and the 10th will be the year of the rooster," he said. The next animal to come along was the dog. The Jade Emperor was surprised at his late arrival. "Why are you here so late when you're such a good swimmer?" he asked the dog. "The water in the river was so fresh and clean that I stopped to enjoy a bath," answered the dog honestly. "Well, you take 11th place," said the Jade Emperor, "so the 11th year of the zodiac will be named after you." Now there was just one place left in the zodiac calendar, and the Jade Emperor was extremely curious as to which animal would arrive next. Finally, he heard a snort from the pig. "You took a long time," said the Jade Emperor. "I had to stop to eat because I felt hungry," answered the pig. "I also had a little sleep because my tummy was so full after the meal that I felt tired." "You've still managed to do well," said the Emperor. "You've come in 12th, so the 12th year of the zodiac will be named after you, pig." The poor cat, who had been pushed into the water by the cheeky rat, finally managed to make it to dry land and claw his way out. Sadly, he was too late to have a year of the zodiac named after him. He was extremely cross with the rat, and to this day, cats and rats have never been friends. From that day until now, the Chinese zodiac has followed the cycle of years named after the 12 winners of the Great Race. The Hare and the Tortoise. One fine spring day, Hare was dashing about here and there. He raced across the field as fast as he could go, enjoying the feeling of the wind rushing against his fur. Standing to one side, a group of animals watched Hare in awe. "Wow, Hare," said Squirrel, "you're so fast." "Like lightning," agreed Mole. "Amazing," added Fox. Hare knew that he was speedy, and he enjoyed showing off. He enjoyed seeing how the other animals watched him in admiration and with more than a little envy. He puffed his chest out proudly and said, "Well, yes, I am fast, aren't I? In fact, I would go so far as to say that I'm the fastest runner of us all. Who would like to race against me? Does anybody think that they could beat me?" None of the animals spoke, but then Tortoise cleared his throat with a dry cough and said, "I'd like to try." Hare began to chuckle. "Oh, Tortoise," he laughed, "you are funny." "I'm serious," replied Tortoise. "Why not?" "Why not?" spluttered Hare. "Oh, Tortoise, you're the slowest creature that there is. That's why not. Why on earth would a hare like me waste his time racing a tortoise?" And he laughed in disbelief. But Tortoise remained firm. "Okay then," agreed Hare. "Let's race now." "But not now," answered Tortoise. "I need some time to train. Let's meet next week and I'll be ready." "Agreed," said Hare, and carried on running. During the week that followed, the animals watched Tortoise as he prepared for the big race. Every day they saw him doing his stretches and warm-up exercises, but he moved so slowly that they were never sure when he was running. "He'll never beat Hare," said Fox. "No chance," added Mole. "Never in a million years," agreed Squirrel. The day of the race arrived. A huge crowd of animals had turned out to watch the event. Tortoise stood still waiting to begin. Hare was entertaining the crowd by performing stretches and jogging on the spot. Mole gave the instructions. "The race starts here," he said, indicating the start line. "You must run all the way across the field to the big oak tree on the other side. First one to the tree is the winner." "Ha!" exclaimed Hare. "Easy." Tortoise said nothing. "Ready?" asked Mole. "Ready," the contestants replied. The animals counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! They shouted. Hare raced off, leaving a cloud of dirt behind him. Tortoise moved slowly across the starting line. The next minute Hare was back. "Come on, Tortoise," he said. "Get going! Don't make this so easy for me." Then he rushed off ahead once more. Tortoise moved slowly, very slowly. Hare was fed up. He muttered to himself. "This isn't a real race. Everybody knows that Tortoise doesn't stand a chance against me. Why should I waste my energy running as fast as I can to the finish line when I could easily beat Tortoise even if I crawled?" He looked around. To the side of the field was a cluster of trees which gave out some much needed shade on this sunny spring day. "I know what I'll do," thought Hare. "I'll lie under those trees and take a nice long nap. By the time I wake up, Tortoise should be a lot further along the race course. Maybe then I could race him to the finish line." So Hare made himself comfortable under the cool shade of the trees and fell asleep. Whilst he was sleeping, Tortoise kept moving. He made his way across the field slowly and steadily. As the sun began to go down, Tortoise was close to the finish line and he could see the giant oak tree right in front of him. Hare was still sleeping. The animals, who were watching the race with great interest, all began to shout now. "Hey, Tortoise!" they cheered. "You can do it! Come on! Keep going! Just a little more!" All of the cheering and shouting from the excited crowd caused Hare to stir and wake up from his nap. When he realised what all of the commotion was about, he jumped up. Why, there was Tortoise, almost about to cross the finish line. Hare could not believe his eyes. He thundered across the field, running faster than he had ever done before. Tortoise could hear Hare approaching, but didn't give up. He kept his focus and kept on plodding on closer to the finish line and the great oak tree. The other animals were going wild. They could see Hare fast approaching and held their breath. Surely Tortoise didn't stand a chance now. But to their surprise, Hare could not reach Tortoise in time. Just as Hare came up behind him, Tortoise stretched his neck out across the finish line. He'd done it. He'd won. Nobody could believe it, least of all Hare. The animals crowded around Tortoise and congratulated him. Mole officially declared Tortoise the winner. As he received his winner's medal, Tortoise looked at the adoring crowd around him and said simply, "There you go. Slow and steady wins the race." Then he joined the other animals for a wonderful evening of fun and celebration. Heidi. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Heidi who lived with her aunt. One day, the little girl travelled with her aunt to her grandpa's little hut in the mountains. It was the first time that Heidi had met her grandpa Alm, and she thought he was a very grumpy old man. Heidi's aunt told the little girl that she'd found a new job in the city and could not take Heidi along with her. The little girl would now be living with Grandpa Alm in his little mountain hut. Grandpa Alm had been living alone for many years. He was actually quite glad to have Heidi's company, but found it very hard to show her how he felt. However, he'd made the little home cosy and welcoming, and the little girl loved her grandpa right from the start. When Heidi woke up after her first night in the hut, she met her grandpa's dog, Joseph. Joseph was a big and very loving dog who immediately became Heidi's playmate. He would go everywhere with Heidi. One day when she was out walking in the hills with Joseph, she met a shepherd boy called Peter. He was watching his herd of goats. Peter, recognizing that Heidi's face was not a familiar one, called out to her, "Hey, hi! Are you new around here? I haven't seen you before." "Yes," replied Heidi, excited to see another young person. "I've just moved here to live with my grandpa." Peter began to take Heidi along with him when he took his goats out to graze. The two became firm friends and would walk together in the mountains. Everything in the countryside was new and exciting for Heidi. She loved to hear tales from Peter and learned a lot from him about how to be a shepherd. Heidi's grandpa also loved her very much, although he didn't really show it. Heidi was also very happy with her new life in the mountains. She would run around in the fresh air every day, playing in the open fields. She was also a kind and caring little girl, and she helped her grandpa with the chores as much as she could. She loved to bake bread and would take freshly baked bread over to Peter's grandmother every day. In return, Peter's grandmother would send fresh goat milk for Heidi and Grandpa Alm to drink. Heidi and Peter spent time together all summer long. Soon, however, autumn arrived, and it was time for Peter to go back to school. Heidi grew bored and missed her friend. She wished that she were old enough to go to school like Peter. One day, Heidi's aunt appeared and decided to take Heidi back to the city. She said that Heidi would be able to be homeschooled at the big house where her aunt was working. Grandpa Alm was disappointed. He'd grown so fond of Heidi and enjoyed her company very much. At first he told Heidi's aunt to leave the little girl in the mountains with him where she was happy. But the more he thought about it, the more he decided that Heidi would be better off in the city where she could learn to read and write and create a future for herself. Heidi was upset. She didn't want to leave Grandpa Alm or their cosy little mountain hut. She didn't want to leave her new friend Peter either. "Grandpa," she cried, "I don't want to leave. Please let me stay here with you." Eventually, Heidi left with her aunt, with the promise that after a short while in the city, she would be able to return to the mountains and visit Grandpa Alm. Heidi and her aunt had a long train journey to the city. When they finally arrived at the big house where the girl's aunt worked, Heidi's eyes opened wide in surprise. "Wow!" she exclaimed. "What a big house! Will I really be living here? I think I'm going to be very happy." Heidi soon met Clara, the girl who lived in the house. Clara had had an accident when she was little, which meant that she couldn't walk and had to use a wheelchair. Heidi's aunt had actually brought her to the house, thinking that she could be a playmate for Clara to keep her company. The two girls came from very different backgrounds. Heidi knew very little about life in the city and often made Clara giggle with her little mistakes. Despite their differences, the girls were soon the very best of friends. Clara's grandmother, however, was very strict. She would shout at Heidi and make her study hard. Clara's grandmother was trying to teach Heidi how to behave in the city and in a big house. She taught her how to sit up properly and how to use a knife and fork at the dinner table. She even dressed Heidi in smart clothes like the other children in the big city. Heidi didn't feel comfortable with all of these changes and longed for the simple life in the mountains with Grandpa Alm. She loved being with Clara, but she missed Peter and her grandpa a lot. Heidi's sadness grew. Soon the little girl even stopped eating because her sadness was too great. Clara's father and grandmother felt very sorry for Heidi and decided that the best thing that they could do was to let the little girl go back to her grandpa. Clara was upset at the thought of losing her good friend, but soon realised that it was the best thing for Heidi. When it was time to say goodbye, Heidi's aunt told her that Clara would come to the mountains and visit her when she was able. Heidi was thrilled to be back in the mountains. The first thing that she did was to visit Peter's grandmother and take her some bread that Clara's grandmother had sent from the city. Then she ran to her grandpa's hut as quickly as she could and gave him the biggest hug. Heidi easily settled back down to her life in the mountains and was excited one day to receive a letter that said that Clara would soon be visiting. She could not wait to have her friend with her again and introduce her to Peter. How she looked forward to having her two best friends together. The mountain air worked wonders for Clara's health. She was having a wonderful time with Heidi and thought very fondly of Peter too. Peter, however, began to grow jealous of Clara. He thought that Heidi would once again go back to the city to be with her friend, leaving him alone. Peter also got tired of having to carry Clara to her wheelchair and push her around. One day, in his anger, Peter pushed Clara's wheelchair off a cliff, thinking that this would make him feel better and solve all of the problems. He didn't realise, though, that Heidi was determined to help her friend as much as possible. Without the wheelchair, and with the help of the clean mountain air, Clara had got a lot stronger. With Heidi's help, she began to take her first steps. After a while, she was even able to take some steps by herself. "I can walk!" she cried excitedly. "I can walk! Oh, Heidi, I couldn't have done this without your help. Thank you so much." Clara's father and grandmother wrote that they would soon come to visit. Heidi and Clara were so excited at the thought of showing them that Clara was able to walk. When they arrived and saw Clara taking steps, they could not believe their eyes and began to cry with happiness. They hugged and kissed Clara, and they also gave thanks to Heidi and Grandpa Alm for all of their care, help and support. By now, Peter was also feeling extremely guilty about pushing Clara's wheelchair off the cliff. He apologised and explained to everybody that he'd done it because he'd been jealous of Clara, but that now he realised what a stupid and dangerous thing it had been, and that he was truly sorry. Everybody could see how sorry Peter was, and they soon forgave him for his actions. They knew that he would never do such a thing again. Everybody hugged each other with joy, and Clara and her family promised that they would return again next summer. The Boy Who Cried Wolf. There was once a young shepherd boy whose job it was to look after the flock. Day after day he climbed up the hillside with the sheep. He would watch over them as they grazed, and all the while he would be dreaming about the excitement of the big city. The peace and quiet of the countryside was not for him. He needed more life, more adventure, more emotion. One day, the boy decided that he could no longer tolerate the long, dull days. He needed some fun, and he knew just what he was going to do. He climbed up the hill with the flock as usual, but this time, once he reached the top, he shouted out at the top of his voice, "Wolf! Wolf! There's a wolf trying to eat the sheep!" He took his horn out from his satchel and blew it as hard as he could. Upon hearing the boy's cries and the sound of the horn, the villagers all came running. There was a great commotion as they all jostled to reach the top and save the sheep. Where's the wolf?" they asked once they arrived, puffing and panting. "Wolf? There is no wolf," laughed the boy. "I tricked you. This job is so boring. I needed to do something to amuse myself, and you should have seen the look of panic on your faces as you came running, you fools." And the boy rolled about laughing. The villagers were angry. "Don't cry wolf again," shouted one of the men, and the others nodded in agreement. They turned their backs furiously on the boy and began to make their way down the hill, back to their homes and businesses. The next day, the boy made the trip up the hill once again. Oh, how he was bored of this routine. Day in, day out, he traipsed up the mountain with the sheep and watched over them. Nothing exciting ever happened. Nothing ever changed. So he decided to trick the villagers once more. After all, yesterday had been the most fun he had had in a long time. He opened his mouth and at the top of his voice cried out, "Wolf! Wolf!" and he blew on his horn as loudly as he could. The villagers heard the boy's cries and came running up the hillside. When they arrived at the top and saw that there was no wolf, they were livid. "Save your cries for when there really is something wrong," they shouted. "Don't cry wolf if there is no wolf. We won't believe you a third time." With that, they turned and made their way down the hill. The boy was too busy chuckling to himself to take any notice of their warning, and the rest of the day passed by uneventfully. The following day, the boy was once again watching over the sheep. It was a warm, sunny day, and he had positioned himself under a tree to get some shade. He tried to stop himself from dozing. Just then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of a black shape moving towards the flock. The boy sat up sharply and looked more closely. There was no doubt about it. It was a wolf. Immediately he began to shout at the top of his voice, "Wolf! Wolf! Come quickly! There's a wolf!" And he sounded his horn. Nobody came. He continued to cry out, "Wolf! Wolf!" But still no villagers came running. The boy was beside himself. He didn't know what to do. There was nothing he could do. He watched in horror as the wolf scattered the sheep far and wide across the hills. Evening came, and the boy made his way slowly down the hill, alone, bringing no sheep with him. "What's the matter?" asked the villagers. "Where are our sheep?" "I shouted," answered the boy meekly. "A wolf came and scattered the sheep. I blew my horn and I shouted, but none of you came." One of the villagers put his arm around the boy, who by now was sobbing loudly. "How could we be sure that you were telling the truth?" he asked the boy. "You had already tricked us twice in 2 days. How were we to know that you weren't tricking us once again? Nobody believes a liar, even when he's telling the truth." The boy stopped sobbing and wiped away his tears. He looked at the villagers. I've learnt my lesson. I'll never cry wolf again," he promised. And he never did. The Golden Goose. Once upon a time, an old man and his wife had 3 sons. The first 2 sons were tall and handsome, and the old man and his wife were always telling them how wonderful they were. The 3rd son was not very tall or handsome, nor was he clever. The family hardly ever called him by his proper name, and instead they called him Simpleton. One day, the eldest son went into the forest to cut wood. His mother gave him a basket which contained her best homemade cake and a bottle of juice. While the boy was walking through the forest, he met an old man. The old man was hungry and thirsty, and, looking hungrily at the basket of food, asked, "Please, dear boy, would you be so kind as to share some of your food with this old man?" But the boy replied, "If I were to share my food with you, I would have none left for myself. Be off with you." And he carried on walking, leaving the old man behind. The old man said nothing, but silently put a curse on the boy, so that when he was chopping a tree, his axe fell and wounded his arm. The next day, it was the turn of the second son to go and chop wood in the forest. Again, the mother packed him a basket of food for lunch. He hadn't been in the forest long before he passed the same old man. "Please," asked the old man, "I'm very hungry and thirsty. Would you share some of your lunch with me?" "Poof," answered the boy. "What I give to you, I lose for myself." And he walked away. Once more the old man said nothing, but not long after the boy began to chop wood, he dropped his axe and hurt his leg so badly he had to be carried home. That was the work of the little old man. As the two eldest brothers were at home, recovering from their accidents, the father spoke to the youngest son, Simpleton. "There is no point in you being at home doing nothing when your brothers are too injured to work. Get yourself into the forest and cut down some wood. If you're not too stupid, of course," added the father slyly. It was not very often that Simpleton was allowed into the forest to chop wood, and he jumped at the chance. His mother prepared him a basket of food, just as she had for her other two sons. But whereas the two oldest sons had been able to enjoy the finest cake and sweetest juice, for Simpleton, the mother packed an old burnt piece of cake and a bottle of water. Nevertheless, Simpleton set off for the forest without complaint. Once in the forest, the same old man asked Simpleton if he might share his food. "I'm hungry and thirsty," he said to the boy. Simpleton was happy to share his food with the old man, but warned him that the cake was burnt and that he only had water to drink. "That doesn't matter," answered the old man. "I'm just grateful for anything that you can give me." And the two of them ate happily together. Once they had finished their meal, the old man turned to Simpleton and said, "You have been very kind to me and shared with me what little you had. You have a good heart. Because of that, I will grant you good luck. Over there stands a tree. If you cut it down, you will find something valuable among the roots." Simpleton thanked the old man and continued on to the tree that he had pointed out. He began chopping. When he was finished, he looked beneath the roots and found a goose with feathers of pure gold. He picked the goose up and took it with him to an inn where he decided to stay the night. He paid for his room with one of the gold feathers. The innkeeper had 3 daughters, and each one of them was curious about Simpleton and the golden goose. Fancy! A goose with golden feathers! The sisters could not stop themselves from thinking about all the things they could buy with the golden feathers. So each one of them decided to try and get her hands on the goose. When Simpleton was fast asleep, the eldest daughter crept quietly into his room. She saw the golden goose resting in the corner of the room. She reached out to touch the golden feathers, but when she tried to move her hand away, it was stuck fast. The girl could not think what to do, so she decided to wait a while and hope that her hand would eventually become free. So the girl sat on the floor and waited next to the goose, while Simpleton snored in bed. It wasn't long before the girl fell asleep too. Soon the door opened again and the middle sister crept in. She saw her sleeping sister and tapped her on the shoulder to try and wake her, but her hand stuck fast. A few hours passed, and by now everyone was sleeping. Simpleton in the bed, the goose tucked up in the corner, and the 2 sisters whose hands had still not become free. The 3rd sister came into the room, hoping for her chance to steal the golden goose. She was shocked to see her 2 sisters already in the room, and fast asleep too. She stretched out her hand to wake the middle sister and find out what was going on. To her surprise and horror, she also found herself stuck fast. The three sisters had no choice but to spend the night beside the goose. The next morning, Simpleton awoke, refreshed. He picked up the Golden Goose and left the inn, paying no attention whatsoever to the three sisters who were stuck hanging on to the bird. The girls ran along in a line behind him, swaying this way and that, depending on the direction that Simpleton took. Along the way, they came across a priest. The priest looked at the strange little group and thought to himself, "My, what a sight! What on earth are those girls doing, running after that poor boy like that?" He tried to stop the sister at the back of the line by putting his hand on her shoulder, but when he tried to lift it again, he discovered that it was stuck fast. The poor priest could see no other option than to run along behind the others. A policeman saw the group go by and thought it was a rather strange sight. "I must find out what's going on here," he said to himself. So he blew his whistle and ran up to the group. "Stop! Stop!" he panted as he reached them, just managing to grab hold of the priest. Of course, the policeman too found himself stuck fast. He joined the procession as they carried on down the road. They hadn't gone far when they passed a couple of workmen who had stopped for lunch. "Help!" cried the policeman. "The priest and I are stuck to this strange little group," he said, indicating Simpleton with his goose and the three sisters. "Could you please try and pull us free?" The workmen grabbed hold of the policeman and pulled with all of their might. Of course, they could not pull neither him nor the priest free, and they soon discovered that they were also stuck to the little group themselves. The group of 7 continued along the path until they arrived at a town. On the edge of the town was the king's palace. The king had one daughter. The daughter was very beautiful, but she had such a sad face, and nobody could ever make her laugh. The king had vowed that whoever could make his daughter laugh should marry her. When Simpleton heard this, he went with his goose and approached the princess. When the princess saw Simpleton and his goose with a strange little train of people all running behind, she began to laugh. Once she had started to laugh, she could not stop. Simpleton was sure that he would marry the princess. After all, he had made her laugh, hadn't he? But the king looked at Simpleton and was not happy with the idea of him marrying his daughter. He began to think of all sorts of excuses. First of all, he asked Simpleton to bring him a man that could drink a whole cellar full of wine. Immediately Simpleton thought of the old man in the forest. He was sure that he would help him. So he went back to the spot where he had met him. There he found a man who looked miserable. "What's wrong?" asked Simpleton. "I am just so thirsty," said the man. "I am sure that I could drink for hours and still my thirst would not be satisfied." "Then come with me," suggested Simpleton. "I know just the thing that could help you." So Simpleton took the man to the palace and sat him down next to a huge barrel. The man tipped the barrel to his mouth and drank without stopping. When that barrel was finished, he moved on to a new one. And so he continued, drinking without stopping, until the cellar was empty and the day was almost over. Simpleton was sure that now he would be allowed to marry the princess. The king was not happy. He still did not like the idea of Simpleton marrying his daughter. So he told him to go out and find a man who would eat a whole mountain of bread. Again Simpleton went back to the forest. There he found a man who looked very unhappy. "I have just eaten a whole oven full of loaves, but what good is that when I still feel hungry?" said the man. "Come with me," replied Simpleton. "I know a way that will help you satisfy your hunger." Simpleton led the man to the king, who had organised for all the bread in the town to be rounded up and brought to the palace. There was now a huge mountain of bread sitting waiting to be eaten. The man from the forest sat down and began to munch his way through the loaves. In one day he had finished all the loaves. For his next task, the king told Simpleton to bring him a ship that would sail on both land and water. "If you can really sail such a ship," he said, "then you may marry my daughter." Simpleton went into the forest, and there sat the old man with whom he had shared his lunch on the very first day. "I have drunk for you, and I have eaten for you," said the old man, "and I will also give you the ship, because you were so kind to me." Then he gave Simpleton a ship that was able to sail on both land and water. Simpleton rushed back to the palace with it and showed it to the king. Upon seeing the ship, the king knew that he would no longer be able to come up with any more excuses to stop Simpleton from marrying his daughter. So Simpleton and the princess were married. Simpleton made the princess happy, and her laughter could often be heard around the palace. They lived together happily, and over the years, Simpleton and his princess had several children. The walls of the palace were full of love and laughter. Pinnochio. There was once an old carpenter called Geppetto. Geppetto loved his work and was happy with his days spent carving things out of wood. However, at the end of the day, when his work was done, Geppetto felt lonely. One day, he carved a little wooden puppet in the shape of a boy. He made the arms and legs so that they could move. Then he sewed together a little outfit for the puppet, as if it were a real boy. Geppetto called the puppet Pinnochio. That night, before he went to bed, Geppetto looked at a bright star in the sky and whispered, "If I could have one wish, I would wish for a real boy of my very own." Then he sighed, got into bed, and went quickly to sleep. That same night, a fairy flew into Geppetto's workshop. She tapped Pinnochio with her wand and told him, "Pinnochio, with this magic, you will be able to move your arms and legs just like a real boy. One day, you will be able to be a real boy, but only if you can prove that you can be good, kind, and brave." Then she introduced Pinnochio to a little cricket who could talk, just like a human can. "This," said the fairy, "is Cricket. He will stay with you and help you to choose between right and wrong. He will help you to make decisions." Then the fairy disappeared as quickly as she had arrived. The next morning, when Geppetto went into his workshop, he was surprised to see Pinnochio walking awkwardly around the room, getting used to his new arms and legs. "You can move!" shouted Geppetto in disbelief. "Yes, and I can talk too. Good morning, father," answered Pinnochio. Geppetto was shocked. He had no idea what could have happened, but he was also full of happiness and excitement. He had a son, a little boy of his very own. He ran to Pinnochio and hugged him hard. One day, Geppetto decided that Pinnochio should go to school, just as the other boys did. He had saved hard to buy his son a new school bag and school books. He felt very proud as he watched Pinnochio leave the little house and head off for his first day at school. Pinnochio skipped along the road, humming happily to himself. The the little cricket sat upon his shoulder. It wasn't long before Pinocchio came across a fox and a cat. "Where are you off to?" they asked Pinocchio curiously. "I'm on my way to school," answered Pinocchio proudly. "Really? On a nice sunny day like today?" said the fox. "It is much too nice to be sitting in school. Why don't you come along with us to the fair? You can learn much more at the fair than you would at school." "Don't listen to him," chirped the cricket. "He doesn't know what he's talking about. It would be much more sensible to ignore him and go to school." But Pinocchio couldn't hear him. He was too excited about visiting the fair, and the cricket's protests fell on deaf ears. Pinocchio agreed to follow the fox and the cat to the fair. At the entrance to the fair was a jolly man in a ticket booth crying, roll up, get your tickets to the fair." Pinocchio's smile fell from his face as he suddenly realised that he didn't have any money to pay for a ticket. A man with a little stall selling trinkets at the entrance to the fair offered to buy Pinocchio's school books from him. "You can use the money to buy yourself an entrance ticket to the fair," said the man to Pinocchio. "No, you mustn't do that," said the cricket. "Your father saved very hard to buy those books for you. It would sadden him to see you sell them like that." But the noise coming from the crowds of happy people all heading through the entrance to the fair drowned out the cricket's voice. Pinocchio didn't hear him and instead handed his books to the man in exchange for just enough money to buy a fair ticket. Then he followed the fox and cat through the entrance to the fairground. Once inside the fairground, Pinocchio saw a little stage. There was a puppet show taking place. "Hey," said Pinocchio to his new friends, "I'm a puppet too, and I can dance just like that. Watch." With that, he jumped up on stage and began to dance next to the two other puppets. People began to cry out from the audience, Look at that puppet! He's got no strings!" "Amazing!" they all cried and began to throw coins at the stage in appreciation. The owner of the fair was watching as more and more gold coins landed on the stage. A plan was soon forming in his greedy head. "This little puppet can make me rich," he thought to himself. He ordered his workers to catch Pinocchio and lock him up in a little cage so that he couldn't escape. Pinocchio would work for him. Pinocchio was sad and scared. He felt very alone and he missed Geppetto. He began to cry. Suddenly the fairy appeared and she asked Pinocchio how he'd ended up inside the cage. "Tell her," whispered the cricket on his shoulder. "Tell her what has happened." But Pinocchio couldn't bring himself to tell the fairy the truth. He thought that she would be angry with him for missing school and selling his school books. So he told her that he had been robbed. "Really?" asked the fairy as Pinocchio's nose began to grow longer. "Yes," said Pinocchio. "There were two men and they took my school bag and books." His nose grew even longer then. "They made me come here to the fair," he said, "and then threw me into this cage." Pinocchio's nose grew even longer still. He looked down and saw the tip of his nose stretching far out in front of his face. "What's happening?" he asked in fright. "Why is my nose so long?" "You know what the truth is, Pinocchio," said the fairy calmly. Pinocchio sighed and took a deep breath. "I came here with a fox and a cat," he began. "I wanted to come. I thought it would be more fun than school." Pinocchio's nose shrank a little. "I had no money for a ticket, so I sold my school bag and books to a little man outside the entrance." His nose got smaller still. "I jumped up on the stage to show how well I could dance, and then somebody captured me and put me in this cage." His nose was now back to its normal size. The cricket smiled at him. "Well done for telling the truth, Pinocchio," he said. The fairy waved her magic wand and the door to the cage opened. Pinocchio was free. She waved it a second time, and suddenly Pinocchio's school bag and books reappeared. "From now on, Pinocchio," said the fairy, "you must remember to do the right thing." Pinocchio set off on the path to school again, this time determined he would get there. Soon a coachman pulled up alongside him and offered him a ride. "No, thank you," replied Pinocchio. "I must get to school." He carried on walking. The coachman insisted. "You will get there much more quickly if you let me give you a ride in the carriage," he said. Pinocchio really wanted to get to school, so he agreed. "Why are you so keen to get to school?" the coachman asked Pinocchio. "Well," answered Pinocchio, "I want to learn as much as I can. Then when I grow up, I can do whatever I want." "What about if I told you that you can do whatever you want right now?" said the coachman. "Have you ever heard of a place called Pleasure Island? There you can do whatever you wish, eat sweets all day, play pool and other such games. It's lots of fun." Pinocchio thought Pleasure Island sounded wonderful. He was so excited that he forgot all about getting to school. "Can you take me there?" he asked the coachman. "I want to go right now." "Don't do it!" cried the cricket, but Pinocchio was not listening. The coachman dropped Pinocchio at Pleasure Island and drove away. Pinocchio was amazed when he saw the place. It was bright and colourful, with buckets of sweets and lollipops all over. There were pool tables and bowling lanes too. It looked so much fun. Wherever he looked, there were groups of boys playing and having fun. Pinocchio reached out his arm and grabbed a handful of sweets, shoveling them into his mouth. For a few days, Pinocchio had the best time. But then he noticed that a lot of the other boys seemed to have disappeared. Whenever he looked around now, all he seemed to be able to see were donkeys. "Hey!" shouted Pinocchio. "What's happening? Where are all the boys?" The cricket looked up at Pinocchio, whose own ears had now been replaced with a pair of long, furry donkey ears. "Quick, Pinocchio," he said. "We need to leave here. All the boys that come here must turn into donkeys eventually. Then the donkeys are sold. Quick, let's run." Pinocchio ran as fast as he could, the little cricket still upon his shoulder. They ran out of Pleasure Island and didn't stop until they reached a port. By now, Pinocchio just wanted to get home to Geppetto. He began to ask all of the people at the port if they knew Geppetto or knew where he was. "Geppetto?" answered one of them. "Isn't that the poor man whose boy went out one morning and never came home? He went out on a boat to look for him, but he never came back." When he heard this, Pinocchio got upset. "It's all my fault," he wailed. "I've got to find Father." Without thinking, he jumped into the water. Pinocchio didn't know how to swim, but luckily, being made mostly of wood, he was able to float on the surface of the water. He used his arms to steer himself around. He looked around at the vast blue ocean. How was he ever going to find Geppetto? Before he had even realized it, something huge and scary had swum up to Pinocchio. It was a giant whale. The whale opened its huge jaws and swallowed Pinocchio and the cricket whole. They tumbled around with a great rush of seawater. When they finally came to a stop, they realized that they were in the belly of the whale. "Gosh, said Pinocchio to the cricket. "That was frightening." "Pinocchio?" came a familiar voice. "Father!" shouted Pinocchio. "Is that you?" Yes, it's me," answered Geppetto. The two managed to find each other and hugged with joy. "How will we ever get out of here?" wondered Geppetto. "Father, I think I have an idea," answered Pinocchio. He quickly gathered some driftwood that the whale had also swallowed. Then he managed to set it alight. As it was burning, Pinocchio waved his arms above the flames, creating black smoke. "This smoke should make the whale cough and sneeze," he said. Pinocchio was right. Within no time, the whale gave a little cough, then another and another, until suddenly it let out a huge sneeze, and as it did, Pinocchio, Geppetto, and the cricket came rolling out of the whale's mouth. At first, Geppetto couldn't find Pinocchio, but then he found him, lying still on the side of the port, his eyes closed. Thinking that Pinocchio would never wake up, Geppetto began to cry. Suddenly, the fairy appeared at their side. "Pinocchio," she said, "you cared enough to go out looking for your father. When you found him, you came up with a plan which saved him. You were really brave and true. For that, you deserve to become a real boy." Pinocchio suddenly opened his eyes. He looked down at his arms and legs. They were no longer hard and wooden, but soft, just like a real boy's. "Father!" he cried, "look at me! I'm a real boy!" "So you are!" exclaimed Geppetto happily. The fairy and the cricket looked at the father and son and smiled to themselves. Then, in a flash, they were gone, whilst Geppetto and Pinocchio hugged each other happily. After that, they made their way home, where they lived very happily for many years to come. The Musicians of Bremen. There was once a donkey who lived with a farmer. The donkey had worked hard for many years in the fields. Now he was old and had become too weak to work and carry the heavy loads he once did. The farmer didn't want him any longer, for what use was it keeping a donkey who couldn't work and earn him money? So the donkey decided to run away. He had heard about a town called Bremen. In Bremen there lived lots of musicians. "That's it," decided the donkey. "I will travel to Bremen and become a musician. I'll play the flute. I will be sure to have a good life there." With that, the donkey set off on his journey. On his way, the donkey passed a sad-looking dog who was sitting by the roadside, out of breath and panting. "Are you all right?" asked the donkey. "What's the matter?" "My master doesn't want me any longer," answered the old dog. "I used to be a hunting dog, but I am too old and tired now to chase after the foxes." "Don't worry about that," said the donkey. "I'm on my way to Bremen to become a musician. I'm going to play the flute. You should come too. You could play the drum." The dog agreed, and the two of them carried on along the path to Bremen. Soon after, they passed a cat who was sitting all by himself looking lost. "What's wrong, old cat?" they asked. "My master doesn't want me any more," said the cat. "I used to chase all of the mice out of the farmhouse, but now I am old and tired and the mice are too fast for me. I can no longer catch them as I once did." "Don't be sad," said the donkey. "We're going to Bremen to become musicians. I'm going to play the flute and the dog is going to play the drum. You understand music, so you could be a musician too." "Great idea," cried the cat. "I'll come with you." So the donkey, the dog, and the cat continued along the path to Bremen. They hadn't gone far when they came across a cockerel at the side of the road. He was crowing sadly. "What's up with you, cockerel?" they asked. "My master doesn't want me any more," replied the bird. "I used to wake him up at the same time every morning, but I am old and tired, and sometimes I forget to crow in the morning. I heard my master say that he wants to turn me into soup." "Don't worry," said the donkey. "We're all on our way to Bremen to become musicians. You have a fine voice. Why don't you come along with us? You could sing." "Oh, I love singing," remarked the cockerel. "I'll come." So the donkey, the dog, the cat, and the cockerel continued along the path to Bremen. It was a long way to Bremen, and the path was very long. Soon it was night time, and the animals lay down for a rest. They were tired and hungry, and it was very cold. "I can see something," crowed the cockerel. "Look!" He nodded in the direction of a house with a bright light in the window and a smoking chimney. "Maybe we'll find something to eat there, and I'm sure we'll be warmer and more comfortable." The other animals agreed, and they headed over to the house. When the animals got to the house, they saw 5 thieves gathered inside. The thieves were having a feast with lots of food and drink. In the corner of the room, there were comfortable beds. "We must get inside," said the donkey. "We need to feast on that food and sleep on those comfortable beds." The animals thought up a plan. They were musicians after all, so they would sing for their supper. They gathered together at the open window. The donkey brayed, the dog barked, the cat meowed, and the cockerel crowed. Then they clambered through the open window. The thieves were frightened by all the noise, and, thinking that some horrible monster must be in the house, they ran away as fast as they could. "Well," said the donkey, "our first concert seems to have gone very well." And the animals began to feast on the delicious food before settling down on the comfortable beds and going to sleep. Out in the forest, in the dark night, the leader of the gang of thieves looked back at the house and noticed that there was no longer a light burning. He turned to the others and said, "Hey, wait a minute. That couldn't have been a monster back there. There is no such thing as monsters. We shouldn't have let ourselves get so scared. I'm going to go back and kill whatever I find." He ran back to the house and crept quietly inside. It was dark and quiet inside. The thief saw the glowing eyes of the cat, and by mistake thought that they must be burning coals, so he held his match next to them, thinking that he could light it. The cat, however, did not understand what the thief meant to do, so he flew at him, scratching him with his claws. The thief ran towards the door, but the dog was lying there sleeping. Upon being woken so suddenly, the dog bit the thief on the leg. The donkey woke up now too and kicked at the thief with his back legs. The cockerel began crowing and making a terrific noise. "Ah, monster, monster!" screamed the thief and fled as fast as he could. The thieves never dared set foot in that part of the wood or in the little house again. The animals, on the other hand, were very happy in the little house. They could find food in the wood and sleep in the comfortable beds. There was really no need for them to travel to Bremen anymore. They lived together happily in the little house for the rest of their days. Aladdin. There was once a poor boy called Aladdin, whose father had died some years before. Aladdin lived at home with his mother. One day, Aladdin was playing out in the street with some other boys when a stranger approached him. "I am your uncle," the stranger said to Aladdin. "I am the brother of your father, Mustafa." "That's strange," answered Aladdin. "My father never told me that he had a brother." And he went running home to tell his mother. "Your father did have a brother," his mother said, "but I thought he had died a long time ago. I will make supper and we'll invite him home to eat." So Aladdin's mother made supper, and Aladdin fetched the stranger. They sat down at the table to eat together. The stranger explained that he had promised Aladdin's father many years ago that he would look out for Aladdin and teach him how to take care of himself and be successful. He asked if Aladdin might accompany him on a trip that he was going to take. Aladdin's mother agreed, and Aladdin and his uncle set off the next day. They travelled for days, and the old man told Aladdin lots of wonderful stories along the way. Finally, they arrived at a cave. It was pitch black, and Aladdin couldn't see a thing. His uncle waved his hand in the air, and suddenly a ball of light appeared like magic, lighting up the cave. For the old man was not really Aladdin's uncle, but an African magician in disguise. Then the magician lit a fire and threw some powder on it, whilst he chanted some magic words. Immediately a square flat stone appeared, with a handle in the middle to lift it by. "Don't be frightened," he said to Aladdin. "Underneath this stone is a treasure that shall be yours. Nobody else must touch it, so you must listen to me and do exactly as I say." Aladdin grabbed the handle and lifted the stone up quite easily. He could see some dark steps leading downwards. "When you get to the bottom of the steps," said the magician, "you will see a door which leads to 3 large halls. You must go through them without touching anything, or you will die instantly. The halls lead to a garden of fine fruit trees. Walk through them until you find a table upon which stands a lighted lamp. Pour out the oil that it contains and then bring the lamp to me." He took a ring from his finger and gave it to Aladdin, wishing him good luck. Aladdin was frightened of the magician, so did as he said. He followed the steps down to the bottom of the cave and through the halls into the garden. He picked up the lamp, poured out the oil, and began to make his way back. Before he did, he picked some fruit from the trees and took it with him. "Hurry up and give me the lamp!" shouted the magician when he saw Aladdin appear at the mouth of the cave. But Aladdin sensed that the magician was going to trick him. He knew that once he gave the lamp to the magician, then the magician would roll the stone back over the entrance to the cave and trap Aladdin inside. So he shouted, "I'll give you the lamp, but not until I get out of the cave." Upon hearing this, the magician got angry. He threw some more powder on the fire, chanted some magic words, and the stone rolled back into place. Aladdin was trapped. Aladdin spent 2 days inside the cave, crying and feeling sorry for himself. He picked the magician's ring from his pocket and rubbed it whilst he cried out, "Oh dear, whatever am I going to do?" Suddenly, an enormous genie rose from the ground and said, "I am the genie of the ring, here to serve you. What do you wish me to do?" "Take me away from here," shouted Aladdin, and immediately he found himself back at home. He told his mother what had happened and showed her the fruits that he had picked from the trees in the cave. He was shocked to see that the fruits were actually jewels. He then asked his mother for some food. "I'm sorry, Aladdin," she answered, but there's no food in the house." Aladdin said that it was okay. He would go to the market and try to sell the lamp to make some money to buy food. "Wait," said his mother. "That lamp is very dusty. Let me polish it up a bit before you take it. It might fetch a bit more money then." She picked up the lamp and began to rub it. Straight away a genie appeared and asked Aladdin's mother what she desired. Aladdin's mother fell down in shock, so Aladdin took the lamp and asked the genie for something to eat. The genie obeyed and brought a feast on silver plates and 2 silver cups full to the top. "Where did you get all of this food from?" asked Aladdin's mother when she finally picked herself up off the floor. "Don't ask," replied Aladdin. "Just eat." The 2 of them tucked into the feast, and eventually Aladdin told his mother all about the lamp and the genie. His mother was scared of such powerful magic and asked Aladdin to sell the lamp and forget all about everything. But Aladdin would not. He insisted upon keeping both the magic ring and the lamp. One day, Aladdin decided that he wished to marry the princess. "Why not?" he said to his mother. "I have the jewels that I found in the cave. I'm sure that if I took those jewels to the Sultan and asked to marry his daughter, he would be thrilled with the idea." Aladdin's mother laughed. "I'm not sure you can convince the Sultan to let you marry his daughter just by turning up at the palace with gifts." But she agreed it was worth a try, so they wrapped some of the jewels in a cloth and Aladdin's mother took them to the palace. The guards did not want to let the mother into the palace, but she insisted that she had something very important for the Sultan to see, so the guards accompanied her inside. The Sultan was impressed by the jewels, but he would not give permission for Aladdin to marry his daughter, the princess. "If your son wishes to marry my daughter, then you will have to bring me even more of these jewels," said the Sultan to Aladdin's mother. Aladdin's mother went home and told her son the news. "No problem," he said. "Ask the genie for another wish." So his mother picked up the lamp and gave it a rub. "Genie, bring us more jewels," she commanded. The genie granted the mother's wish, and immediately there were piles of jewels on the table. Aladdin and his mother packed them into bags, and the woman took them to the palace the next day. "Wonderful!" cried the Sultan. "But even these jewels are not enough for my precious daughter. If your son is serious about marrying her, then he will build her a palace made of the finest gold and marble." Once again, the mother returned home and told Aladdin the Sultan's demands. They got out the lamp and the woman rubbed it until the genie appeared. She then asked the genie to make a fine palace of gold and marble fit for a princess. The next morning, the Sultan awoke to see a most wonderful new palace standing next to his own. The golden walls shone in the sunlight. The Sultan was amazed. "Fantastic!" he exclaimed. "This man must be very powerful if he can make such a palace appear overnight. He is even more powerful than my advisor. He shall have my daughter's hand in marriage." He called his daughter in to tell her the news. "My dear," he said, "look at this wonderful palace that has been created just for you. You shall marry this man." The princess looked at the Sultan and sighed. Yesterday you thought your advisor was the most powerful man in the land, and you wanted me to marry him. Now you want me to marry this stranger, this Aladdin. Tell me, father, what do we really know about this man? Why can't I decide who I marry? What does it even matter who is the most powerful?" The princess left the room, shutting the door angrily behind her. When Aladdin heard that the princess did not want to marry him, he decided that he would not give up. He tried everything that he could to win the heart of the princess. He asked the genie for help. The genie conjured up a magic carpet and Aladdin took the princess for a ride through the night sky. Aladdin and the princess talked and laughed together as they rode through the twinkling stars, staring down at the city below. They had a wonderful time together, and by the end of the magical ride, the princess had fallen in love with Aladdin. The pair were soon married and lived happily in the palace of gold and marble. However, their happiness was not to last. The African magician had discovered that Aladdin had escaped from the cave and married a princess. He knew that Aladdin's good fortune must be due to the magic lamp, and he was angry. The lamp should have been his. He must get the lamp and ruin Aladdin's life in the process. So the African magician travelled for several days and nights until he reached the city where Aladdin lived. He waited until he saw Aladdin leave the palace and then knocked on the door. He had disguised himself as a merchant. When the princess opened the door, he said, "Dear girl, I am a merchant who buys old lamps. If you have an old lamp at home, I will gladly take it from you in exchange for a shiny new one." The princess fetched the magic lamp and handed it over to the magician. He gave her another lamp that he carried in his bag. The plan had worked perfectly. Now that the magician had the magic lamp, he wanted to use it to take the palace and the princess for himself. He rubbed the lamp and commanded the genie to take the palace to a faraway desert with both the princess and himself inside. Aladdin arrived home later that day and found that the palace had disappeared. He knew at once that the magician was to blame. The Sultan was angry and blamed Aladdin for his daughter's disappearance. He told Aladdin to go out and find his daughter and bring her back. Aladdin searched for days and weeks. He searched far and wide, but he could not find the palace or the princess. Finally, Aladdin remembered the ring that he had once been given by the magician. He rubbed it and asked the genie of the ring to reveal where the magician was hiding. He soon found out that the magician and the princess were living in the palace in the middle of a desert. Aladdin asked the genie of the ring to bring his palace back, but the genie was not powerful enough. Only the genie of the lamp could do such magic. "But you could take me to the palace, to my princess," said Aladdin. The genie of the ring nodded, and within seconds Aladdin was outside of the princess's window. The princess hugged Aladdin when she saw him and told him all about the merchant who had appeared at the door asking for old lamps. She explained how he kept the lamp on a belt that he wore at all times. Aladdin knew that they had to hatch a plan if they were ever going to get the lamp back and free the princess from the evil magician. Aladdin told the princess to invite the magician for a special meal that evening. He gave the princess a special potion to mix in the magician's drink. This potion would make him fall fast asleep as soon as he took a sip from his cup. He would be so deeply asleep that no noise or movement should wake him. Then Aladdin would undo the belt from around the magician's waist and take the magic lamp. Everything went according to plan. Once he had the lamp, Aladdin asked the genie to move the palace back to where it was and leave the magician alone in the desert. The genie obeyed, and the Sultan was overjoyed with happiness to have his daughter return. He hugged Aladdin and thanked him. One day, Aladdin went down to the ocean with the lamp. He rubbed it and called for the genie to appear. "What is your wish, master?" asked the genie. "My wish is for you to be free," answered Aladdin. The genie was excited. "I have had many masters, but not one of them has ever made a wish for me before," cried the genie. "Thank you." With that, the genie was freed from the magic lamp. Aladdin took the empty lamp and tossed it as far as he could into the ocean. The lamp had brought nothing but problems. Aladdin knew now that greed and envy were nothing to be proud of. All he wished for now was a life of love and happiness, and he didn't need a magic lamp for that. Aladdin and the princess lived happily for many years to come, ruling over the land after the death of the sultan, and leaving behind a long line of dutiful kings. The Goose That Laid the Golden Eggs. There was once a farmer and his wife who had a goose. The goose laid eggs every morning, but eventually the goose became old and died. So the farmer and his wife went to the market to buy a new one. The couple spent a long time looking around the market before settling on a rather fine-looking goose. Happy with their choice, they took it back home. The next morning, when the couple woke up, the farmer went to collect the eggs. Imagine his surprise when he looked into the nest and saw that the egg that lay there was yellow and shiny. He picked it up and noticed immediately how heavy it was. This was not a regular goose egg. The farmer's first thought was to throw the egg away and go back to the market to complain. Someone must have played a trick on him. But he went back to the farmhouse and showed the strange egg to his wife. "Goodness me!" cried his wife in excitement after examining the egg. "This egg must be made of pure gold. Look how it glitters and shines. Feel how heavy it weighs in your hand. What a stroke of luck!" The next morning, the farmer went out to collect the eggs again. When he looked into the goose's nest, he found another shiny golden egg. Full of excitement, he showed it to his wife, and they agreed that they would take it to the market and see if they could sell it. They were amazed by how much money the glittering egg fetched. "We're going to be rich," shouted the farmer. "If this goose keeps laying golden eggs like this, then we will soon have plenty of money and be able to buy whatever our hearts desire." So it continued. Each morning the farmer would wake up and check the nest, and each morning there would be a shiny golden egg waiting for him. The farmer and his wife would take the egg to market and come back with bags of coins. But there was a problem. The farmer and his wife were spendthrifts, and as soon as they received the bags of coins, they spent them. And the goose would lay just one golden egg a day. The couple began to get greedy. "This goose does not lay eggs fast enough," complained the farmer. He thought for a while before saying to his wife, "I've had a thought. This goose lays one golden egg each day. Just think of all the eggs that must be inside it, just waiting to be laid. I say that we cut the goose open and pull out all of those shiny eggs in one go. If we take them all to market at the same time, we will be rolling in money." The farmer's wife agreed. The couple imagined bags of coins piled up high in their farmhouse kitchen. The farmer was counting his riches in his imagination and dreaming of all of the things they would buy. But excitement soon led to disappointment when they cut open the goose and found that no golden eggs lay inside. Each one blamed the other for their misfortune. "You fool!" shouted the farmer's wife. "Twit!" retorted the farmer. The pair began to cry. The very next day, the farmer and his wife decided to go to the market and buy a new goose, hoping that this one would also lay golden eggs. But to their disappointment, the goose did not. They felt very foolish and began to regret their mistake of cutting open the goose that laid the golden eggs. For they realised that they had been greedy, and that not only had they not got rich all at once, but they had also lost everything. "I have learnt my lesson," cried the farmer. "By being greedy, we have ended up with even less than we started with." The farmer and his wife never did get rich again, but lived a modest life on their little farm with their goose and all of the other animals, dreaming of the life that could have been theirs. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Once upon a time, in a remote Persian town, there lived a modest, hard-working woodcutter called Ali Baba. Ali Baba's cousin Kasim lived in the house next door. Kasim was lazy. He lay around all day doing nothing. He was also very rich, but very jealous of those who had more money than he did. One day, as Ali Baba was out chopping wood, he saw a large group travelling towards him, riding on horseback. He became nervous. "Maybe it is the group of thieves that people have been speaking so much about lately," thought Ali Baba to himself. "The ones they call the 40 Thieves. I've heard that they hide their treasure in the forest." So he quickly climbed up a tree out of view. Ali Baba was correct. It was the 40 Thieves. The men got off their horses close to Ali Baba's hiding place. They picked up their bags of stolen goods and carried them to a cliff face. The leader looked at the cliff face and said, "Open sesame!" To Ali Baba's great surprise, a door appeared out of nowhere and opened wide, letting the thieves inside. Ali Baba stayed quietly up in the tree, keeping watch until the door mysteriously appeared again and the thieves came piling out. Then the leader of the group waved his arm in the air and uttered the words, "Close, sesame!" The door disappeared from sight. As soon as the thieves had left, Ali Baba went over to the cliff face. "Open sesame!" he shouted, just as the leader of the thieves had done. He was amazed to see a door appear, and he walked through it. Inside, Ali Baba discovered a real treasure trove. There were sacks overflowing with jewels, silver and gold. There was no doubt at all that this was where the thieves hid their takings. Ali Baba picked up a couple of bags of gold coins. He didn't think it would be too bad to take a little something that was already stolen. He threw the bags over his shoulder and headed towards the closed door. "Open sesame!" he cried. The door opened and he went through it and into the forest. Once on the other side, he said, "Close sesame!" and watched the door disappear behind him. Ali Baba loaded the bags of coins onto the backs of his donkeys and made his way home. Once he was home, he showed his findings to his wife. Ali Baba's wife could hardly believe their good fortune. She tried counting the coins, but there were too many of them. She realised that she would need a measure. "The neighbours will certainly have a measure," she told Ali Baba. "I will call round now and ask to borrow one." So she went next door and asked Kasim's wife for a measure. Kasim's wife became suspicious. What on earth could it be that Ali Baba and his wife wished to measure? She thought to herself. So when she went into the kitchen to fetch the measure, she smothered some sticky honey onto the base. Ali Baba and his wife measured out their gold, but did not notice how one of the coins became stuck to the syrupy honey. Kasim's wife certainly noticed though. "Look at this," she squealed to her husband. "Your cousin Ali Baba is a cheat. He goes around pretending to be a poor little woodcutter, and all this time he has more gold than he can count. He deceives us." Cassim ran straight round to Ali Baba's house, barging through the door. He was wild with envy. Ali Baba did not know how to calm his cousin, so he told him the secret about the hidden treasure and the invisible door. Cassim demanded to be taken there so that he could see it for himself. Ali Baba promised to take him the next day. Cassim, however, had other plans. He knew that if he waited for Ali Baba to take him to the treasure, he would have to share the riches with him. So he got up very early the next morning and snuck out by himself. With him, he took 6 donkeys and 6 empty sacks to transport the treasure back home. Upon reaching the place that Ali Baba had described, Cassim shouted, "Open, sesame!" When the door opened, Cassim walked through it and watched as it shut behind him. Thrilled to see all of the jewels and gold, Cassim wasted no time filling up his sacks. He worked as fast as he could in case the thieves should make an appearance. When he came to leave the cave, Cassim realised that to his horror, he could not remember the magic words. He had forgotten them amidst all of the excitement. "Open, sweetie!" cried Cassim. But the door did not open. "Open, seashells!" he tried. "Open, soldiers! Open, sunshine!" Oh dear, mumbled Cassim to himself. "I'm sure it's something with an S, but I just can't think what it could be. Oh dear, now I'm stuck." Cassim began to panic. Then suddenly he heard a voice outside and the command, "Open, sesame!" The door opened and Cassim found himself face to face with the leader of the thieves. "So you planned to rob us of our treasures, did you?" spat the leader. Well, it seems we are in luck. Earlier today we lost one of our group. We are in need of someone to ride with us so that we can be the 40 thieves once more. Come." The thieves tied Cassim's hands behind his back. They placed him on one of his own donkeys and made him ride along with them. Cassim was rather sneaky, and to try and make himself look better before the thieves, he told them all about his cousin Ali Baba discovering the thieves' secret cave. "If you treat me well," he told the thieves, "I will show you where this man lives." The thieves decided that they must get rid of Ali Baba. They could not risk him telling any more people where they stored their stolen treasures. Their leader came up with a plan. "Tomorrow you will take Cassim's 6 donkeys into the town and find 14 more, so that we have 20. Then find 40 barrels for the donkeys to carry. Fill one of the barrels with oil and then come to me with everything." The next day everything was ready. The leader told the group of thieves to each hide in one of the barrels, all except one thief who was to lift the barrels up onto the donkeys 2 by 2. "And most importantly," said the leader, "once you are hidden inside the barrels, you must not come out, nor must you make any noise. You must wait patiently for more instructions." That evening the leader arrived at Ali Baba's house. Behind him was the line of 20 donkeys, each carrying 2 barrels. Each barrel contained a thief tucked tightly inside. The leader was disguised as an oil merchant. He bowed to Ali Baba in greeting. "Good evening," he began. "I have travelled a long way to sell my oil tomorrow at the market, but I need somewhere to stay for the night, and the inns are all closed. Could you be so kind as to provide me with somewhere to sleep?" Ali Baba had no idea that the oil merchant was really the leader of the 40 thieves. He agreed at once to find him a bed for the night. He led the donkeys to the stable and gave them food and water. He took the oil merchant inside and gave him a good supper, which his cook, a young girl called Morgiana, had prepared. Ali Baba still had no idea that his guest was planning to kill him. Morgiana, however, was suspicious of the merchant from the moment that she set eyes on him and decided to watch him carefully. After supper, the leader of the thieves, still disguised as an oil merchant, crept out of the house to give instructions to the other thieves. He went around each barrel, tapping on the side of it and whispering, "When you hear me throw some stones down from my bedroom window, it is time to attack." Morgiana, who had been following the oil merchant, saw and overheard everything. She realised that the barrels were full of thieves who were planning to attack and kill her boss, Ali Baba. She knew that she would have to think quickly. She ran inside the house looking for something that she could use to cover all of the air holes in the barrels. Once she had filled the holes, she knew that the men inside would no longer be able to breathe and they would pass out. This gave her some time. She ran to the house of the local sheikh and knocked on his door and explained quickly what she knew. "A man came to stay at Ali Baba's. He says he's an oil merchant looking for a place to stay for the night, but I followed him and he plans to kill Ali Baba. He has a group of men hiding in barrels in Ali Baba's stables. I have plugged up the air holes so that they won't be able to breathe. They will not be a threat for now, but the leader is planning on throwing stones from his window so that they know when to attack. If the thieves don't react, then the leader will know there's something wrong, and I am sure he will rush to set them free. They have swords, and they are the ones who've been robbing people in our village." Immediately the sheikh alerted his guards and they rushed to Ali Baba's house. The sheikh himself went up to the bedroom where the pretend oil merchant was staying and captured him. The other guards went to the stables and removed the thieves, including Qasim, from the barrels. They were alive, but thanks to Morgiana's quick thinking, weak from the lack of fresh air. They were easily captured by the guards. Ali Baba was upset to discover that he had been betrayed by his cousin, but he was overjoyed by the loyalty and kindness shown to him by Morgiana. The guards led the thieves away, and Ali Baba returned to the cave, taking Morgiana with him. Together, they returned the stolen items to the people of the village. Ali Baba's son fell in love with Morgiana after witnessing what a kind heart she had. The two got married, and so the story ended happily for Ali Baba and his family. The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. There was once a hungry wolf who would prowl around a flock of sheep night after night, trying to catch himself one to eat. He never managed it, as the watchful shepherds would always chase him away. One night he made his way carefully up the hill, hiding behind shrubs and bushes on his way. Upon reaching the top, he saw the flock of sheep grazing peacefully and licked his lips. His excitement soon turned to displeasure as he saw the shepherds standing guard. The wolf wondered what to do. Just then, to his right, he noticed an old sheepskin lying next to a bush, and an idea began to form in his head. "Aha!" whispered the wolf to himself. "I know just what I can do with this." He picked it up with his teeth and pulled it home, where he continued to think out his plan. The next day, the wolf shrugged the sheepskin over his back. When the shepherds passed the wolf's hideout on their way up the hill, the wolf slipped in and joined the flock of sheep, following the shepherds to the top of the hill. The wolf grinned to himself. "I look just like one of them," he thought. "What a perfect disguise." None of the sheep noticed anything untoward, and neither did the shepherds. The wolf was tempted to act immediately and pounce on the other sheep, but he decided to wait patiently for the perfect moment to strike. It was soon evening and the sun was beginning to fade. The shepherd walked the herd, including the wolf in disguise, back down the hill. The sheep were herded into their pen and the gate locked. "This is perfect," thought the wolf, whose tummy was beginning to rumble. "The shepherd has locked me in with all of the sheep. I'll be able to have a feast tonight." Just as the wolf was getting excited, he heard the creak of the wooden gate and the footsteps of the shepherd coming back into the pen. The wolf lay still. Before he knew it, he was being picked up by the scruff of his neck. Little had he realised, but the shepherd was also hungry, and it just so happened that he had decided on mutton stew for supper. The wolf's disguise was so convincing that the shepherd believed he was slaughtering a sheep. It was only when the wolf lay dead on the floor that the shepherd realised his mistake. "Dear, dear," tutted the shepherd, "would you look at this? It seems that your disguise worked just a little bit better than you had expected, my dear wolf." And that was the story of how the deceitful wolf met his sticky end. Alice in Wonderland. One bright and sunny afternoon, Alice sat under the shade of a tree together with her sister. Alice's sister was reading a story out loud from a book, but Alice wasn't really paying attention. She much preferred to sit and daydream. Today she was imagining a magical world with talking animals. All of a sudden, a little white rabbit went rushing past Alice. He was puffing and panting. "Oof!" he exclaimed. "I'm late, I'm late." A rabbit wearing a suit and carrying a pocket watch? Alice could hardly believe her eyes. Excuse me," she cried after the rabbit. "Wait!" But the rabbit, clearly in a hurry, kept on running. Alice decided to follow him. She followed the rabbit to a large rabbit hole into which he promptly disappeared. Alice looked at the rabbit hole and, feeling curious, decided to go down it. She came to a long, dark tunnel. Alice crawled along, using her elbows to move herself forward. She couldn't see anything in the dark, and the tunnel soon dipped downwards, sending Alice sliding downwards along a long chute and landing with a bump at the bottom. She was just in time to see the white rabbit disappearing. The rabbit had gone through a little door in the side of the wall. It was much too tiny for Alice to get through. Yet there was no way she could climb back up the chute. How was she to get out? Alice felt trapped. Suddenly, to her amazement, the doorknob began to speak. "A talking doorknob," thought Alice to herself. "How very strange indeed." "If you want to get through the door," continued the doorknob, "then you must drink the potion on the table over there." Alice looked around the room and saw that there was a little table with a medicine bottle standing on it. The bottle had a label on it that read, "Drink me." Curiously, she took hold of the bottle and opened it. She took a deep breath and then tipped the contents of the bottle into her mouth, swallowing them down. Alice began to feel strange. She glanced around her and realised that the room looked different. Then it hit Alice. She was tiny. The table leg was as big as a mountain, and the door, which had previously appeared so tiny, now seemed a normal size. The bottle must have contained a magic shrinking potion. Alice went over to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. With dismay, she realised that the key was up on the table. She tried to climb up the table leg, but it was no use. It was too slippery. "Oh dear," cried Alice out loud. "What am I to do?" Alice began to panic. She didn't want to be trapped down here forever. But just as she was about to cry, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. Next to one of the table legs was a little glass box. Alice wandered over to it and peered inside. There she could see a little biscuit with the words "Eat me" marked on it. Alice picked up the biscuit and took a tiny bite. She began to shoot up slowly. Then she nibbled some more and some more. Soon Alice had grown so tall that her head hit the ceiling. She grabbed the key from the table. But then Alice realised that she was once again too big to fit through the door. She might have the key now, but it was no use if she was too big to get through. Tears fell from Alice's eyes. Huge tears began to fill the room with water. Then Alice noticed the potion bottle. There was still a few drops left in the bottom. Hurriedly she drank from the bottle and noticed how she began to shrink again. To save herself from drowning in her own tears, she climbed into the glass bottle. Floating, she managed to sail through the keyhole and land on the other side of the door. Alice ambled along until she came across the White Rabbit once again. He was standing at the door to her house and mistook Alice for his maid. "Come," he said to Alice, "come inside now and fetch my gloves for me." Alice took advantage of the White Rabbit's confusion to have a good look around the home. She couldn't find the gloves that he was talking about, but instead she found some cakes. Unable to resist, Alice took one of the cakes, then another and another. In no time at all, she had transformed into a giant. Her head came through the roof and her arms and legs broke through the walls of the house. It seemed that in this strange land, food changed people's size. Alice pulled a carrot up out of the garden and nibbled it. She breathed a sigh of relief as she realised that she was returning to her usual size. She followed the White Rabbit, who was rushing away once more. She was led into a forest where she was met by a cat with an enormous grin. He told Alice that he was called the Cheshire Cat. He was sitting in a tree and there were wooden signs all around him, pointing in all different directions. "Please," said Alice, "could you tell me the way home?" The Cheshire Cat pointed towards a secret path. Alice followed the path, but instead of taking her home, it took her to a house with a big long table set out in the garden. Sitting around the table drinking tea was the March Hare and a man in a big tall hat. Alice called him the Hatter. Also at the table was a little dormouse fast asleep. "No room, no room," they cried when Alice came towards the table. "There's plenty of room," said Alice and pulled out a chair to sit down. "Have some wine," offered the Hatter. "I can't see any wine," replied Alice, looking round the table. All she could see were teapots and teacups. "There isn't any," exclaimed the Hatter. "Well, what on earth did you offer it for then?" said Alice. "It's not polite to offer something when you know full well that you don't have it." "Nor is it polite to sit down without being invited," retorted the Hatter. The Hatter and the March Hare continued to talk absolute nonsense, leaving Alice extremely confused. She decided that from now on the Hatter should be referred to as the Mad Hatter, for he really was quite wacky. She listened to their silly tales for a little while longer, before deciding that enough really was enough, and she got up from the table and walked into the wood. Alice saw a castle in the distance and headed in that direction. It was not long before she found herself at the entrance to the castle grounds. There she could see some playing cards. She rubbed her eyes in disbelief. Yes, They really were playing cards, with arms and legs and hands and feet. They appeared to be very busy, painting rose bushes with tins of bright red paint. "Why are you painting those roses red?" asked Alice curiously. "We planted white rose bushes by mistake," answered one of the playing cards. "We're painting them red to cover up the error. The Queen will have our heads chopped off if she finds out." The sound of a trumpet blowing disturbed Alice, and when she looked in the direction of the sound, she saw that it was the White Rabbit who was carrying the instrument. Behind him was the Queen of Hearts. Upon seeing the girl, the Queen came over and spoke to Alice. "What is your name, my girl?" she asked. "My name is Alice, Your Majesty," replied Alice whilst curtsying. "Very well, Alice," boomed the Queen. "Come and play croquet." Alice followed the Queen of Hearts to an area in the garden set up for a croquet game. It was the strangest game of croquet that Alice had ever seen. She was quickly beginning to realise that nothing in this world was quite as you would expect. The mallets for hitting the ball were actually flamingos, and the balls themselves were little hedgehogs all curled up. Playing card soldiers standing on all fours created the arches under which the hedgehog balls were to be hit. Alice found it very hard to play the game because her flamingo mallet had a life of its own and would not stay still. The Queen began to lose patience with Alice. Eventually she shouted the order, "Off with her head!" Alice panicked and began to run, a trail of playing card soldiers chasing after her. Alice tried to be brave. "I'm not afraid of you," she shouted. "You're nothing but a pack of cards." Immediately, the whole pack of playing card soldiers rose up in the air and came scattering down on top of her. Alice screamed and tried to swipe them away with her hands. Suddenly, she noted the brush of her sister's hand on her face. She was brushing away some leaves that must have fallen down onto Alice's face from the tree above. "Alice, Alice, wake up," she whispered. "You've been asleep for ages." Alice looked around her, confused. "What a strange dream I've had," she muttered. Alice knew there and then that she would never forget her strange and magical visit to Wonderland. The Tale of Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter. waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not, unfortunately, run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop up on the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently Peter sneezed, "Ka-choo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go, along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The Tale of Benjamin Bunny by Beatrix Potter. One morning, a little rabbit sat on a bank. He pricked his ears and listened to the trip-trot of a pony. A gig was coming along the road. It was driven by Mr. McGregor, and beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best bonnet. As soon as they had passed, little Benjamin Bunny slid down into the road and set off with a hop, skip and a jump to call upon his relations who lived in the wood at the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. That wood was full of rabbit holes, and in the neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt and his cousins, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail and Peter. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. She earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and muffetees. I once bought a pair at a bazaar. She also sold herbs and rosemary tea and rabbit tobacco, which is what we call lavender. Little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. He came round the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled upon the top of his cousin Peter. Peter was sitting by himself. He looked poorly and was dressed in a red cotton pocket handkerchief. "Peter," said little Benjamin in a whisper, "who's got your clothes?" Peter replied, "The scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden," and described how he had been chased about the garden and had dropped his shoes and coat. Little Benjamin sat down beside his cousin and assured him that Mr. McGregor had gone out in a gig, and Mrs. McGregor also, and certainly for the day, because she was wearing her best bonnet. Peter said he hoped that it would rain. At this point, old Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard inside the rabbit hole, calling, "Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch some more chamomile." Peter said he thought he might feel better if he went for a walk. They went away hand in hand and got upon the flat top of the wall at the bottom of the wood. From here they looked down into Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter's coat and shoes were plainly to be seen upon the scarecrow, topped with an old tam o' shanter of Mr. McGregor's. Little Benjamin said, "It spoils people's clothes to squeeze under a gate. The proper way to get in is to climb down a pear tree." Peter fell down head first, but it was of no consequence, as the bed below was newly raked and quite soft. It had been sown with lettuces. They left a great many odd little footmarks all over the bed, especially little Benjamin, who was wearing clogs. Little Benjamin said that the first thing to be done was to get back Peter's clothes, in order that they might be able to use the pocket handkerchief. They took them off the scarecrow. There had been rain during the night, there was water in the shoes, and the coat was somewhat shrunk. Benjamin tried on the tam o' shanter, but it was too big for him. Then he suggested that they should fill the pocket handkerchief with onions as a little present for his aunt. Peter did not seem to be enjoying himself. He kept hearing noises. Benjamin, on the contrary, was perfectly at home and ate a lettuce leaf. He said that he was in the habit of coming to the garden with his father to get lettuces for their Sunday dinner. The name of little Benjamin's papa was old Mr. Benjamin Bunny. The lettuces certainly were very fine. Peter did not eat anything. He said he should like to go home. Presently he dropped half the onions. Little Benjamin said that it was not possible to get back up the pear tree with a load of vegetables. He led the way boldly towards the other end of the garden. They went along a little walk on planks under a sunny red brick wall. The mice sat on their doorsteps cracking cherry stones. They winked at Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin Bunny. Presently, Peter let the pocket handkerchief go again. They got amongst flower pots and frames and tubs. Peter heard noises worse than ever. His eyes were as big as lollipops. He was a step or two in front of his cousin when he suddenly stopped. This is what those little rabbits saw round that corner. Little Benjamin took one look, and then, in half a minute less than no time, he hid himself and Peter and the onions underneath a large basket. The cat got up and stretched herself and came and sniffed at the basket. Perhaps she liked the smell of onions. Anyway, she sat down upon the top of the basket. She sat there for 5 hours. I cannot draw you a picture of Peter and Benjamin underneath the basket because it was quite dark and because the smell of onions was fearful. It made Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin cry. The sun got round behind the wood and it was quite late in the afternoon, but still the cat sat upon the basket. At length there was a pitter-patter, pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. The cat looked up and saw old Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the wall of the upper terrace. He was smoking a pipe of rabbit tobacco and had a little switch in his hand. He was looking for his son. Old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatever of cats. He took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall onto the top of the cat and cuffed it off the basket and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. The cat was too much surprised to scratch back. When old Mr. Bunny had driven the cat into the greenhouse, he locked the door. Then he came back to the basket and took out his son Benjamin by the ears and whipped him with the little switch. Then he took out his nephew Peter. Then he took out the handkerchief of onions and marched out of the garden. When Mr. McGregor returned about half an hour later, he observed several things which perplexed him. It looked as though some person had been walking all over the garden in a pair of clogs, only the footmarks were too ridiculously little. Also, he could not understand how the cat could have managed to shut herself up inside the greenhouse, locking the door upon the outside. When Peter got home, his mother forgave him because she was so glad to see that he had found his shoes and coat. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and old Mrs. Rabbit strung up the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling with the bunches of herbs and the rabbit tobacco. The end. The Lion and the Mouse. One warm sunny afternoon, a lion lay sleeping under the shade of a tree. He was comfortable and cool and snored contentedly. His head, with its rugged mane, lay resting on his great paws. A little mouse was running through the jungle. She scuttered quickly along, trying to escape a bird that had been circling above her in the sky. As she ran, she bumped into a large, soft mound. The mouse looked up and saw that it was the lion. The lion was angry at having been woken from his deep slumber. He reached out a paw and grabbed the mouse's tail. Then he opened his great jaw. Fearing that she was about to be eaten by the lion, the little mouse summoned up all of the courage that she could and spoke in her tiny voice. "Pardon me, O King," she said. "I'm so sorry that I woke you. Please forgive me and let me go. If you do, then I shall remember forever. If you ever need a favour one day, then you can count on me to help." The lion smiled. "You? Help me?" He laughed. "My goodness, little mouse, you really don't have any idea, do you? I am the king of the jungle, and you are just a tiny little thing. How on earth would you propose to help me?" But the lion was so amused by the mouse's suggestion that he decided to let her go. "But don't wake me up again," he roared. "I shall not be so forgiving a second time." The little mouse nodded in gratitude and scurried off quickly on tiny trembling legs. Days went by. Everything carried on as usual. The lion spent his nights prowling for prey, and during the day he slept under the trees. The little mouse scurried about here, there and everywhere, looking for tiny morsels to eat and hiding from other hungry animals. The lion walked around with his chest puffed out, proud to be king of the jungle. He shook his impressive mane every once in a while in an attempt to impress the other jungle animals. He was so busy showing off that he didn't spot a trap that had been laid by hunters. He walked straight into it. The net was made of thick, heavy rope and closed around him, leaving him trapped. He roared in anger as he realized that he was powerless to escape. He imagined the hunter arriving the next morning and celebrating his catch. Nothing and nobody, thought the lion, would be able to save him now. Not far away, amongst the blades of grass, the little mouse was going about her day. Her ears twitched as she heard the deep sound of the lion's roar. He sounded upset about something, she thought. All at once she remembered her promise. "Forgive me, and one day I will help you," she recalled. The little mouse knew what she had to do. She had to find the lion and find out what was wrong. She must help. After all, she had promised. She scampered along through the tall grass blades, following the sound of the lion's voice. She ran as quickly as she could. When she arrived and saw the lion in the trap, she shouted, "Don't be afraid, lion! I'm here to help!" The lion looked up forlornly, his eyes sad. "Oh, what can you do, little mouse?" he sighed. The mouse ignored the lion and quickly set to work. She continued all through the evening and all through the night, until finally she had nibbled and gnawed her way through the thick rope that held the lion in the trap. As the sun was rising, the rope snapped and the lion was able to break free from the net. He shook his mane and let out a deafening roar. "I'm free! I'm free!" he declared. Upon hearing the lion's tremendous roar, the little mouse began to shake. Had she made a mistake in setting the lion free? Was the king of the jungle now going to eat her? The little mouse could not help but worry. She peeped carefully up at the lion's face, which was now bending down towards her. Little Mouse was quivering with nerves. The lion looked at the trembling little mouse and spoke to her kindly. "Little mouse," he said softly, "it is okay. I will not harm you. I wish to apologize to you. I was foolish to laugh when you suggested that one day I may need your help. I couldn't imagine how a grand lion such as myself would ever need the help of a feeble little mouse. But you proved me wrong, and you were true to your word. You came running to help when I needed you. You have just shown me that little friends can be great friends after all. Thank you, kind little mouse." With that, the lion bent his head down even further, and the little mouse scurried up his mane and held on tightly. The lion then began to walk through the jungle, carrying his new little friend. All of the other jungle animals looked on in wonder at the regal lion and his new friend, the humble little mouse. Beauty and the Beast. There was once a wealthy merchant who had 3 daughters. One day the merchant had to set off on a long journey. "What would you like me to bring you when I return?" he asked the 3 young girls. The 2 eldest daughters did not need to think. Immediately they shouted, "A beautiful new dress, father!" The 3rd daughter, whom everyone called Beauty due to her kind heart and pretty face, was much more sensitive and softly replied, "I would like a rose picked by you, father." The merchant set off on his travels. On his way back home, he was in need of a place to spend the night. He came across a huge castle. He knocked on the door but heard no reply, so he went in. He found a warm and cosy bed and slept the night. The next morning, as he was leaving, he saw a beautiful rose bush within the castle grounds. Remembering Beauty's wish, he picked a fine red rose. The next moment, the merchant heard a rustling coming from behind the rose bush, and suddenly a large, frightful-looking beast stepped out and roared at him. "How dare you take flowers from my garden?" he roared. "Not content with spending the night in my home uninvited, now you're stealing from me?" The merchant was afraid. He quickly began to explain to the beast about his kind-hearted daughter back at home, and how he had promised to come back with a pretty rose for her. The beast decided to let the merchant go, but only if he promised to send Beauty to the castle. The merchant agreed and hurried back home. He told Beauty all about his deal with the beast. Beauty was upset, but she loved her father with all her heart, so she agreed to go. The beast was kind to Beauty. The girl was given the finest room in the palace and dined on the most exquisite food in the castle's grand dining hall. Beauty loved to read, and the beast showed her the castle's magnificent library. He told her that all of the books were hers, should she so wish. Beauty would often spend her days curled up in a cosy armchair reading a book, with the beast sitting by her side. Beauty had been afraid of the beast when she first arrived at the castle, but she was gradually becoming very fond of him. "Marry me, Beauty, please," said the beast one day, when the 2 of them were sitting together in the library. Beauty was still a little scared of the beast's frightful appearance. "I'm sorry," she told him sadly, shaking her head. The beast was upset by Beauty's rejection, but continued to treat her with as much kindness and affection as he had before. One day, he came across Beauty out in the castle gardens. She was looking at the rose bushes and sobbing. "Beauty," he said gently, "whatever is the matter?" "I miss my father and my sisters," replied Beauty tearfully. "Then let me show you something," said the beast. He took Beauty into a dressing room. Lying on a little table was a hand-held mirror. The beast picked it up and passed it to Beauty. "Here," he said, "whenever you look into this mirror, you will see your family." Beauty took the mirror from the beast. True enough, when she looked into it, she could see exactly what her father and sisters were doing at that moment. Beauty felt closer to them, but she also felt sadness at not being able to be there with them. One day, Beauty looked into the mirror and saw that her father was very ill. She pleaded with the beast to be able to go home and be with him. The beast roared back at her. "You made a promise to never leave this castle," he shouted fiercely and stomped away. The beast, however, cared deeply about Beauty, and once he had had a little time to calm down, he found her again and said, "You may visit your father and care for him whilst he is ill, but you must promise to come back to the castle in a week's time." Beauty hugged the beast and hurriedly packed her bag and headed off to her father's house. He was weak and very tired, but his face lit up brightly when he saw his youngest daughter. All week Beauty cared for her father. She made him soup and read to him. She told him about books she had read in the castle library and about her walks around the garden with the beast. One night, Beauty woke up with a start. She had had a terrible dream that the beast was dying. It was only then that Beauty realised just how much she cared for the beast. She couldn't bear the thought of him dying. By now, Beauty's father was feeling much better, so Beauty kissed him goodbye and explained that she must hurry back to the castle and check on the beast. As soon as she saw him, she flung her arms around him and hugged him tight. "I'm sorry, beast," she cried. "I don't want you to die. I will live here with you forever." All at once, the beast began to change into a handsome prince. Beauty could not believe it. The beast began to speak. "Dearest Beauty," he explained, "I have been living under a curse for several years. The only thing that could break my curse was for somebody to fall in love with me. I turned bitter and miserable. It seemed impossible that anyone could ever love me with such a beastly appearance. But then you came along, and I am now cured of that ghastly curse because of you. You have shown that you truly love me." Beauty hugged the beast as tightly as she could. She had never been happier. The two of them were married and lived happily ever after in the great castle. Johnny Appleseed. Once there was a man who was very, very poor. He had been a farmer and grown wonderful crops, but somehow he lost his farm and was left all alone. He had always wanted to do something great, something that would make many people happy. But what could he do? He had no money. All he had was a small boat. As he trudged along one day, he saw some old sacks lying under a tree. As he looked at them, he had a wonderful idea. He picked up the sacks and placed them in his boat, jumped in himself and floated away. As he rowed down the stream, the man watched the shore carefully. When he saw an apple orchard, he rowed to land and tied up his boat. Then he hurried along to the homes near the orchards and asked for work. He cut wood, carried water, and did all sorts of odd jobs. In payment for this work, he asked for food. And what else do you imagine? The people were so surprised at what he asked for that they could hardly believe him. He asked that he might have the seeds from the apples that lay on the ground under the trees. Only the seeds. The people gave them to him gladly, and as he cut the fruit, the neighbourhood's children swarmed about him. From one place to another he went, always adding to his store of seeds. Some generous farmers also gave him cuttings of peach, pear and plum trees and grapevines. Day after day he cut up the fruit while the children sat at his feet and listened to tales of what he had seen on his travels. He talked about the Indians with their colourful blankets and feathers, of their camps where they lived in the forests, of the wolves which came out at night to watch him as he sat by his fire, and the beautiful deer who ran across his patch. He sang funny songs for the children and taught them all sorts of games. When it came time for him to move on, the children begged him to stay, but onwards he went, and when his bags were full, he knew it was time for him to carry out his great idea. He rowed on and on in his little boat until there were no more houses to be seen. Splendid forests lined the banks here and there. Then he paused, for this was what he was looking for, a place where no one lived. He landed and went about with a bag of seeds, and when he reached an open place in a forest, he planted seeds and cuttings of trees and vines, then wove a brush fence about them to keep the deer away. He then hurried back to his boat and drifted on. In many, many places he landed and planted seeds, and all the orchards of the Ohio and Mississippi Valley are owed to this man. Years after, when settlers came looking for a place to live, they chose these spots where, to their great surprise, they found all sorts of trees loaded with fruit. This man's name was John Chapman, but he was nicknamed Johnny Appleseed. The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. It was a very cold evening. It was almost dark and snow was falling heavily. A poor little girl, dressed only in rags and with no shoes to cover her feet, was walking through the snowy streets. When she had left her home, she'd been wearing slippers, but they belonged to her mother and had been far too big for her. They had fallen from her feet as she had rushed across the street, trying to avoid two carriages that had come rattling by at great speed. She'd lost one of the slippers, despite searching desperately, and a boy had run away with the other one. So the little girl had no choice but to walk on her bare feet, which were turning numb and both red and blue with the freezing cold. She was wearing a long pinafore dress, and in the pocket were several boxes of matches. She'd been trying to sell them all day, but nobody had bought anything from her. The poor little girl was miserable. She was both extremely cold and hungry. The snowflakes continued to fall down thick and fast, landing on her long curly hair. It was New Year's Eve, and all around her lights were flickering in windows, and the smell of roast dinners wafted from houses where families were gathered together for the celebrations. The little girl sat down on the corner of the street. It was getting colder and colder, but the little girl didn't dare go back home, as she knew that her father would be angry at her for not selling anything. Besides, it was cold in their house too, as the roof was full of cracks through which the cold wind whistled. She could hardly feel her hands now with the cold. If only she could light one of the matches and warm herself with its heat. The girl took a match from the box and struck it. Immediately it lit up and gave off a warm, bright glow like a tiny candle. She held her hands over it and felt the warmth. She imagined that she was sitting beside a warm, cosy fire, nice and comfortable. The next moment, the little candle burned out. The little girl's daydream ended, and she held the burnt remains of the match in her hand. She lit another match, which again burned brightly. The glowing light fell onto a brick wall, and the little girl imagined what was in the room behind it. She could see a table decorated with a pretty tablecloth and laden with food. There was roast turkey and stuffing and cranberry sauce. Shiny silver cutlery lay spread out ready for the guest to tuck into the extravagant meal. Then the little flame went out, and the little girl could once again see only the thick brick wall. She lit a third match. She could see herself sitting underneath an enormous Christmas tree. It was beautiful. It was even more wonderful than the tree she'd seen last Christmas when she looked through the window of a rich man's house. Thousands of lights twinkled, and hundreds of delicate baubles and other decorations hung from the branches. The little girl reached out her hands to touch the delicate ornaments. The light from the match went out, but the twinkling Christmas lights seemed to rise higher into the sky. She saw them as bright as the stars. One of the lights fell down, trailing a long line of fire behind it. Someone must be dying, thought the little girl. Her grandmother had always told her that when somebody died, a star fell from the sky. She struck another match, and in the glow she could see her kind, wonderful grandma standing in front of her. "Grandma!" cried the little girl. "Please take me with you. I know that once this match burns out, you'll disappear, just like the cosy fire, the delicious feast, and the wonderful Christmas tree." The little girl began to strike match after match. "If I keep the light burning," she thought to herself, "then my grandma will still be here with me." The matches burned brightly. The little girl had never seen her grandma looking so grand and so beautiful before. She let her grandma scoop her up in her arms and fly with her up into the sky, higher and higher, until they were in a place where neither of them felt cold or hungry. They were at peace. But back down on the street corner, leaning back against the thick brick wall, sat the little girl with cold rosy cheeks and a smiling mouth, frozen to death on New Year's Eve. The figure of the little girl sat with a bundle of matches in her hand, several of which were now burned. "The poor little girl," said passers-by. "She only wanted to warm herself." But none of them knew about the wonderful things the girl had seen: the warm, cosy room, the table laden with food, and the beautiful Christmas tree. Nor did they know how happy the little girl had been to see her kind, wonderful grandmother and fly away with her into the bright new year. The Discontented Pumpkin. Jack Frost visited Farmer Crane's field one night, and the next morning the golden pumpkins shone more brilliantly than ever through their frosty silver coverings. "It's of no use," said one large pumpkin to another lying beside it. "It is of no use. I was never made to be cut up for pumpkin pies. I feel I was put here for something bigger." "Why? What do you mean?" said the other. "You never seemed unhappy before. You surprised me." "Well, to tell the truth, I don't like the thought of being cut up and served on a table like an ordinary pumpkin. See how large I am, and what a glorious colour. Tell me, did you ever see such a beautiful pumpkin?" "You are beautiful indeed, but I can't imagine being used for anything but pies. What other use is there for a pumpkin?" "Well, I have always thought that I'm not like the other pumpkins in this field, and when Farmer Crane pointed me out as the finest one he had, I heard him say, 'That would be a great one for a fair.' It was not until then that I really knew what I was destined for." "I do remember," answered the other. "Yes, I do remember hearing about some pumpkins being taken to a country fair once, but I never heard whether they liked it. As for myself, I would be proud to be made into delicious pies and served on a beautiful plate." "How can you be happy with that? But there is Father Crane now. He's gathering some of the smaller pumpkins to make pies with, I think." "Perhaps he knows what best you are made for," answered the other. Farmer Crane was soon at their side and was looking from one to the other. "What fine pies they will make! I had better take them now, I think," he said, and they were quickly added to the golden heap already on the wagon. How happy they all were, all but one that lay on the top of the large pile. It was a long way from the top of the pile to the bottom of the wagon, but it was easy enough to slip away from the rest. It would only take a second, and then he could be away from the others. But, oh no, the discontented pumpkin slipped a little too far, and I'm sorry to say, soon lay on the frozen ground, a shattered heap. "Dear me," said the pumpkins in one breath. "See that one that slipped off and is broken to pieces? What a feast the cows and pigs will have." "It is too bad," said one. "And he was so anxious to be taken to a fair," added another. "Hooray for the tiny seed! Hooray for the flower and vine! Hooray for the golden pumpkin, yellow and plump and fine! But better than all beginnings, sure nobody can deny, is the end of the whole procession, this glorious pumpkin pie. A Tale for Halloween by Loretta Ellen Brady. Babette and Anton were the children of a very poor woodcutter. They lived in a little cottage on the side of a steep mountain, and the mountain looked upon a great forest. Although their father worked hard in this forest all day, he earned very little. Their mother made fine laces which Anton carried to the market to sell, but in spite of all their efforts, the poor parents could hardly provide their children with enough to eat. Babette and Anton, however, were happy little children and never once thought about how poor they were. But it worried the woodcutter that Anton was 10 years old and had never been to school. Anton's mother taught him to read and write at home, and Anton was a good pupil. Often, as he sat doing his sums with a bit of charcoal for a pencil, his mother would sigh sadly. Anton did not like his mother to be sad, so he always laughed to cheer her. "Don't worry, mother," he would say. "Soon I shall send myself to school. My vegetable patch is doing well. When I get myself a good job, you and father will be poor no longer. I'll buy father a team of oxen and you a fine satin dress. Babette shall have a dozen real dollies instead of the turnip dollies she plays with now." "Oh, Anton," his mother would answer with a sigh, "unless you make your fortune as a toy maker, I fear you will have no fortune at all. You are so talented with your hands, but we cannot spare you to go to school." It was true. Anton was very talented and could make almost anything. He made boats from bits of wood, and when he had fitted them with sails, they looked as splendid as any you would buy in a toy shop. He carved a doll's cradle from a pine knot and painted the white face of a turnip so that it was transformed into a doll. This turnip dolly's eyes were so blue and her cheeks so pink. Her hair of golden corn silk fell in waves, and her robe of young cabbage leaves was so green and beautiful. Then, as often as this turnip dolly faded and began to shrivel, Anton made another, which Babette declared was always more beautiful than the one before. Babette had never been to the village and therefore knew nothing of real dolls. She loved her turnip babies so much. She always carried them in her arm when she went with Anton to meet their father, and sang them little songs as she rocked them to sleep. One night in the season of Halloween, Anton sat carving jack-o'-lanterns to sell in the village. Babette, who was rocking her dolly to sleep, sat watching him. Being but 6, she knew nothing about the fun which comes with Halloween, and she listened round-eyed with wonder to Anton, who knew all things about jack-o'-lanterns. When she heard that boys and girls dressed like goblins and witches and played out in the village streets, Babette made up her mind to join in too. "How wonderful it must be!" she cried, clapping her hands. "Halloween must be like Christmas." "Not quite, Babette," answered Anton as he carved the teeth in the last jack-o'-lantern. "But Halloween is wonderful nevertheless. It's fun to see the jack-o'-lanterns bobbing up and down with their faces grinning in the candlelight. And on Halloween the boys and girls play pranks on their elders that they would never dare at any other time. But everyone laughs and enjoys themselves on Halloween." Anton finished the jack-o'-lantern and piled it with a dozen more in his little cart. He would sell them all in the village market the next day. No one else could carve such splendid pumpkin faces as Anton. "Then we should go and play pranks in the village too, Anton," cried Babette. "Mother will make us goblin dresses, and there's still one great pumpkin in your garden for a jack-o'-lantern. Oh, what fun we'll have!" "Babette," exclaimed Anton in astonishment, "wherever did you get such an idea? The fun in the village is not for us. Mother has no time to make us goblin dresses, and if she did, She has no materials. Besides, how would we find our way home through the forest? You know the way through the forest, Anton, insisted Babette. And if Mother cannot make us goblin dresses, we can go without. It will be dark, and our jack-o'-lantern will be as good as any. Come on, she begged. I've never been to a Halloween event before. Now, Babette, I tell you we can't go to the village tomorrow night, answered Anton. I could not find my way home through the forest after dark, and we will both be lost. Be a good girl and don't mention it any more. Anton spoke firmly, and Babette burst into tears. She liked getting her own way, and when she could not have it, sometimes she was a very naughty little girl. She sobbed and wept so much that Anton found it hard to say no to her. However, he didn't dare go to the village at night, as he was scared of losing his way in the forest. So Anton bounced Babette on his knee and whispered that he would buy her chocolate. But she only cried even harder. Now, Babette, cried Anton at last, when Babette showed no signs of stopping, I can't take you to the village. But if you're a good girl and stop crying at once, I will make you something fun for Halloween, just for you and me. Now, promise me you won't cry any more. Babette dried her eyes and promised. She wished for some Halloween fun, but whether that was at home or in the village was not important to her. Will we wear goblin costumes or ghost costumes, Anton? She asked. Anton puzzled a moment before he answered. Oh, ghost costumes, I think, he replied. The next day, Babette was very good. She helped Anton gather his vegetables for market, and when he returned, sat beside him quietly while he carved the last pumpkin from his garden. When the jack-o'-lantern was finished, Anton lit the candle just for 1 second so that she might see it grinning in the light. Babette clapped her hands, but Anton held up a warning finger. The Halloween fun was to be a secret. After supper, the children went to bed as usual, but instead of undressing, they pulled their white night dresses over their heavy coats. These can be our ghost costumes, whispered Anton when all was still, and they crept softly out. In the moonlight, the jack-o'-lantern was grinning wildly. Pumpkin is smiling at us, laughed Babette. She was very excited. Anton struck a match to light the candle, but there was no candle in the jack-o'-lantern. I put the candle in, I know I did, he said in surprise. He searched in the dark, and Babette stopped her laughing. Anton looked about, and there, beneath the bench, lay the remainder of his precious candle. It was chewed to bits, and the wick was in shreds. Oh no, he cried. A wicked rat has stolen our candle. Oh, the bad rats, cried Babette, bursting into tears. She stamped her foot and sent the jack-o'-lantern rolling off the bench. It hit the earth with a bump, and the nose was bashed. What a baby you are, Babette. See what you've done, cried Anton. He stooped to pick up the pumpkin, but the pumpkin was too quick for him. Oh, no, you don't, laughed Pumpkin in a thick, throaty sort of voice. Babette smashed my nose a little, but that's no big deal for me on a Halloween night. Goodbye, boys and girls, he called, and rolled swiftly down the hill. You come back here, you're my pumpkin, cried Anton as he began to chase after it. Babette followed, weeping and crying aloud. Oh no, she mourned. Now we have no jack-o'-lantern and no candle either. But you just wait until he rolls down into the vegetable garden, shouted Anton as he chased the swiftly rolling pumpkin. He'll have to stop at the hedge. He pulled at his little sister's hand to try and make her run faster. Pumpkin rolled along just in front of them, but always just out of their reach. When he reached the hedge, he gave a great leap and landed directly in the vegetable patch. Come on, turnips, come on, carrots, called Pumpkin as he rolled along. At his words, the carrots and turnips tore themselves from their beds and followed after him, shouting. Come on, called Pumpkin. Parsnips and beetroots followed the carrots and turnips. Look at Anton following us, yelled Pumpkin, and all his vegetable followers turned and laughed. On any other night you might be in charge, Anton, they cried, but not on Halloween. This is our night. Well, you wait until I catch you and then see how hard you'll laugh, called Anton angrily. To see his vegetable patch ruined made him furious. But you'll wait until you catch us before you punish us, won't you, Anton? They answered mockingly. Oh, it's Halloween, sang Pumpkin, cartwheeling as he rolled along, and the rest of the vegetables followed after him. Anton followed them with determination. He would not give up easily. Follow me, sang Pumpkin, as he led the way to a tiny door that opened beneath the forest. Turnips and carrots squeezed through, and Anton, fearing to be left behind, ran faster. Just as he reached the little door, a rough potato tried to slam it in his face, but Anton was too quick for him. He ran through and climbed down the hole into the underground forest. There he continued to chase, but the ground here was springy and elastic, and with each step, Anton got closer to the vegetables. We'll catch up to them, declared Anton as they ran along. Even as he spoke, Potato stubbed his toe and Babette caught him. She held him firmly, although he squirmed and tried his best to get free. Help! Help! bawled Potato when he saw that he was a prisoner. Oh, Pumpkin, wait for me! he cried. The tears streamed from every one of his eyes, and he looked truly sad. At his cries, Pumpkin turned around, and all the vegetables followed their leader. Come now, Anton, began Pumpkin in a persuasive voice. You might let us have one night off, you know. Halloween is our night. It's all very well for you to be polite, Pumpkin, and try to help your friend, said Anton. But let's not forget that Potato tried to slam the door in my face not 2 seconds ago. Oh, Anton, cried Potato, that's wrong. It was actually 3 seconds ago. I looked at my watch just as I was trying to pinch your nose in the underground door, and it's definitely 3 seconds ago. Maybe 4. Oh, be quiet, cried Pumpkin. That's no way to talk when you're trying to get let off. Let him off for my sake, Anton, he continued. You'd almost certainly get bored too if you were lying in a vegetable patch all day. But, Pumpkin, replied Anton, think of my vegetable garden. It's ruined. I was saving all my vegetable money to pay to be able to go to school, and now I won't be able to go for such a long time. I'll have no vegetables to sell. Besides, how could I know you got tired of lying in my vegetable patch? You never spoke to me before. Well, I'm telling you now, replied Pumpkin. And as for your vegetable patch, we'll all make that up to you, won't we, boys? We will, called the vegetables in chorus, and the potato in Babette's little fist yelled the loudest of all. There, now you see we mean no harm, declared Pumpkin. So let Potato go. Then you can both join us in our Halloween fun. At the magic words, Halloween fun, Babette put Potato down at once. She was bound to have her fun, and after all, the vegetables seemed to be a good lot. So peace was made, and the children followed the bobbing turnips and onions. Then shouts were heard, and Pumpkin ordered everyone to stop. Soon they were joined by a dozen or more cabbages. Anton recognised the cabbages at once. You're Father Minette's cabbages, aren't you? He inquired politely as they marched along. Why, if it isn't little Anton, the woodcutter's son, exclaimed the very stout cabbage. As they went marching on, Pumpkin sang and danced in the lead, and onions and carrots echoed his songs. Soon great black cats with shining yellow eyes stepped from behind the trees, and each cat was soon joined by its mistress, who was no other than a real witch in a tall peaked hat and carrying a broomstick. The cabbages, who were a friendly lot, introduced Anton and Babette to these witches, and the witches seemed pleased to meet the children. "They don't seem to be wicked witches, do they, Anton?" whispered Babette. "Oh, my dear," replied a witch who overheard, "we are not a bit wicked on Halloween, you know. Any other night I would probably cause some mischief. It is my nature, you know." She reached in her bag and handed Babette a peppermint. Babette, who was very fond of peppermint, ate it up quickly. "You shouldn't do that, my dear," reproved the witch. "Witches very rarely give peppermints, and when they do, the peppermints should be treasured. Here is another to keep for your pocket, and then you will never be without a peppermint when you want one." And she handed Babette another. Babette curtsied so prettily that the witch was charmed and took her to ride on her broomstick. It was the most wonderful company you could ever imagine as they marched along. Every vegetable was singing a different Halloween song, and they all had voices that sang out of tune. Babette, her little white nightdress flying in the breeze, was riding on the witch's broomstick and singing as loudly as the rest. When they reached the dancing floor, it was lit with millions and millions of glowworms, and an orchestra of 10,000 frogs hummed lively tunes in their throats. Pumpkin seized a handful of glowworms and put them in his head. Then, with his features all aglow, he cried out, "Ready for the dance!" Instead of taking partners, the vegetables just plunged onto the floor and began to jump about like mad. The witches took their brooms and chased their cats around the edge of the circle. Babette danced hardest of all. She wasn't a great dancer, but she had fun, singing at the top of her voice. "Come and dance too, Anton," called Babette as she went jumping past her brother, but he shook his head and laughed. "I'm too big for such nonsense," he said. "I am 10, you know." "What nonsense!" cried a witch who was chasing her cat close by. 10 is exactly the right age to have fun. She raised her broom playfully, and before he knew it, she swept Anton into the middle of the dance. Pumpkin, his grinning features all aglow, went flying past and made Anton feel proud. Pumpkin was certainly the most handsome vegetable of the lot. As the night went on, the frogs hummed faster, but hum as fast as they would, they could not keep up with the vegetables. Beetroots and cauliflowers continued to bob up and down like mad. Cabbages from Minette's farm lost leaf after leaf. Carrots and onions grew battered from so much tumbling about, and the sound of song and laughter grew louder and louder. "Let's play blind man's buff," called Anton. "I'll be it and show you how to play." He tied the handkerchief over his eyes, and the witches and their black cats went darting this way and that. The vegetables were so pleased with this new game that they would play nothing else. They might have still been playing it if a cockerel had not suddenly crowed. "Good gracious me!" cried a witch. "The glowworms are all gone out. It's nearly morning. All who are going back to the vegetable patch had better be on their way." "Not I," cried Pumpkin. "I've done with vegetable patches forevermore." "Not we," exclaimed the cabbages. "We're going to be wild cabbages for the rest of our days. We shan't go back to Mother Minette's pickle jars." Straight away, every vegetable began to raise its voice and declare it would not go back to Anton's patch. "Oh, hush, all of you," cried the witch. "Stay in the woods for the rest of your life if you like. It doesn't matter to me. But what about Anton and Babette? Who's going to take them home?" "Well," replied Pumpkin, "we thought that you might give them a ride home on your broomstick." "But Pumpkin," cried Anton in dismay. "You promised to make it up to me if I let Potato go, and I think you should all come back with me. I won't have any vegetables if you all stay in the woods." "Never worry about that, Anton," replied Pumpkin. "Here is a purse for each of you, and if you take good care never to lose them, you will have plenty of gold forever. Isn't that true, boys?" "True," cried the cabbages. "You had better hurry and plant yourselves before daylight comes, Pumpkin," they warned, and began to dig holes in the earth. Before Anton and Babette had climbed onto the witch's broomstick, all the carrots and turnips, and even Pumpkin, were all tucked up in their sandy beds. They called out goodbye as the children sailed off with the witch. "Oh, what a fun Halloween evening," sighed Babette, as she leaned her head on Anton's shoulder and fell fast asleep. The broomstick flew swiftly, and the witch warned Anton to hold Babette tightly. One by one the stars went out as they sped across the sky. The black cat steered and seemed to know the exact way to the woodcutter's cottage, for just as dawn was breaking, the broomstick glided down to Babette's window. The witch shook hands with Anton, and the black cat politely jumped off to help Anton with his little sister. Before the cat could climb back on again, the broomstick was off like whirlwind, and the black cat was left behind. "This broomstick is so wild I can't stop it," called the witch from the clouds. "Take good care of my cat until next Halloween." Anton put Babette in her bed and then made the black cat a comfortable bed in the kitchen. Then he lay down to sleep and dreamed of the Halloween excitement until he was wakened by his mother. "Come, Anton," she cried, "I have good news for you. Only look from the window and see the great black cat without a single white hair that sits washing his face in the sun. Such a cat coming to us on Halloween will surely bring us good luck. But come and get up, for the sun is high and it's time for you to dig your vegetables for market." "My vegetables have gone wild in the forest," muttered Anton. "But it doesn't matter. Here is a bag of gold which they gave me. The cat is the black cat of the witch who brought us home on her broomstick. So let me sleep, Mother, for I am tired with dancing at the Halloween party." He closed his eyes and slept again, while his mother examined the leather bag. "Anton, my son," she screamed, "look at this gold! Where have you been to get this?" She shook him and gave him no peace until he woke fully and told the story. Even then his mother did not believe it. Instead, she decided that her son must be delirious with fever. The woodcutter and Babette came running to see what had happened, and at the sight of the second bag of gold, the poor woman grew calmer. Babette showed the peppermint which the witch had given her, and the mother doubted no more. "To receive a peppermint from a witch is surely a mark of great favour," she said, and began to laugh through her tears. "I thought I was dreaming, or that Anton raved of fever, for never in my life had I seen so much gold." "It's like the fairies to bless the children of the poor," said the woodcutter. "Now Anton will go to school, and Mother will have a beautiful dress and shawl." "Is it not like I said?" cried his wife. "A black cat coming on Halloween would bring us good luck, and here is the luck already." It would have been hard to find a happier family than the woodcutters as they set out for the village that day. When it was told that the woodcutter was looking to buy a pair of oxen, some people laughed out loud. The woodcutter was too poor to feed a pair of canaries, they declared, never mind a pair of oxen. But when they heard that the woodcutter's wife had bought a new dress and a golden ring, they began to wonder who had died and left the woodcutter a fortune. Anton told the tale of their wealth to those who asked him, and straight away the village children ran to throw their jack-o'-lanterns from the roofs and high places. but their pumpkins broke or stayed on the ground below where they had fallen. It was no longer Halloween now, remember. At noon, when the woodcutter and his family sat down to dinner in the village inn, the landlord threatened to charge a penny from all who stood gazing through the windows. Many people didn't believe the story of the pumpkin and the bags of gold, but there, next to the woodcutter, on the table, were the 2 leather bags filled with gold. The greatest marvel of all was that no matter how much the woodcutter or his wife spent from these, the bags always remained brimful of gold. The 3 Little Pigs. Once upon a time, there lived a mother pig and her 3 sons. They lived happily in a cosy cottage in the middle of the forest. One day, the mother pig told her sons that it was time they went out into the world to earn their fortune. She kissed them goodbye, and the 3 little pigs set off in 3 different directions, each one of them carrying a bundle of his belongings on his back. The first little pig had not gone far before he came across a man carrying a bundle of straw. "Please, would you give me that straw so that I could build a house?" asked the little pig. The man, who was very generous, gave him the bundle of straw, and soon the little pig had built a pretty little house with it. Not long after the house was finished, a wolf came along, knocked at the door, and said, little pig, let me come in." But the little pig laughed and answered, "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." So the wolf shouted, "I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down." So he huffed and he puffed, and the little straw house immediately came tumbling down. The wolf quickly ate the little pig all up. The second little pig came across a man carrying a bundle of sticks. "Please, could I have those sticks to build myself a house?" asked the little pig. The man agreed, and the second little pig set to work and had soon built himself a cosy little house of sticks. The wolf came along and said, little pig, let me come in." "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin," answered the second little pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down," said the wolf. So he huffed and he puffed and he puffed and he huffed, and at last he blew the house down and gobbled the little pig up. The third little pig met a man carrying a load of bricks, and he asked, "Please, would you give me those bricks so that I may build myself a house?" So the man gave him the bricks, and the little pig built himself a nice, strong little house. Not long after it was finished, the wolf appeared at the door and said, little pig, let me in." But the little pig answered, "No, no, by the hair of my chinny chin chin." "In that case," said the wolf, "I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down." Well, he huffed and he puffed, and he puffed and he huffed, and he huffed and he puffed, but he could not get the house down. At last he ran out of breath, so he sat down outside the little pig's house and thought for a while. After a while he called out, "Little pig, I know where there's a nice field full of turnips." "Where?" asked the little pig. "Behind the farmer's house, 2 fields away. Be ready in the morning and we will go there together and get ourselves some nice breakfast." "Very well," said the little pig. "What time shall we go?" 6 o'clock, replied the wolf. Well, the little pig was clever, so he got up at 5 o'clock and scurried to the field, bringing home a fine load of turnips. At 6 o'clock, the wolf came to the little pig's house and said, "Little pig, are you ready to go?" "Ready?" cried the little pig. "Why, I've already been to the field and come back a long time ago. I am busy boiling a pot full of turnips for my breakfast." The wolf was very angry indeed, but he made up his mind to catch the little pig somehow or other. So he told him that he knew where there was a nice apple tree. "Where?" said the little pig. "Round the hill in the farmer's orchard," said the wolf. "I'll come for you tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock, and we'll go there together and pick some juicy apples." So the next morning, the little pig got up at 4 o'clock and was off and away long before the wolf came. But the orchard was a long way away, and it was not easy for the little pig to climb the tree and pick apples. So the little pig was still filling his sack when he saw the wolf coming towards him. He was shaking with fright, but tried to be as brave as possible. So when the wolf said, "Little pig, what are you doing here already? Are the apples nice?" The little pig replied at once, "Yes, they're delicious. I will throw down one for you to taste." He picked up an apple and threw it so far that whilst the wolf was running to catch it, he had time to jump down and scurry away home. The next day, the wolf called again and told the little pig that there was going to be a fair in the town that afternoon, and asked him if he would go with him. "Oh yes," said the pig, "I would love to. What time shall we go?" "At 4:30, said the wolf. So the next day, the little pig set off for the fair much earlier than the time he had agreed with the wolf. He had a wonderful time and was just getting ready to leave when he saw the wolf coming. He did not know what to do, so he crept into a nearby barrel. The barrel tipped up and began to roll. It rolled down the hill over and over, with the little pig squeaking inside. It rolled so fast that it knocked the wolf flat over. Once the barrel came to a stop at the bottom of the hill, the little pig was able to crawl out and run the rest of the way home. The wolf was so angry that he went over to the little pig's house. "Little pig!" he shouted angrily. "I'm going to climb down your chimney and nothing will stop me from eating you up." But the little pig was very clever. He went over to the fireplace and put a pot of water on to boil. The wolf came down the chimney and fell straight into the pot of boiling water. That was the end of the big bad wolf. As for the little pig, he lived happily ever after in his little brick house and was never troubled by a wolf again. Mother Frost. A widow and her 2 daughters lived near a spring at the edge of a forest. One of the daughters was a beautiful, kind soul who helped her mother around the house as much as she could. The other daughter was ugly, both inside and out. She was lazy and never lifted so much as a finger to help her mother. Despite this, the mother loved the lazy, ugly daughter because she was her own child. The kind, beautiful girl was her stepdaughter, and the mother did not care for her at all. She would give her all of the hard tasks to do around the house. Every day the young girl would sit at the spinning wheel by the well and spin until her fingers were sore and bleeding. One day, The girl was washing her hands in the well when she dropped one of the spindles into the water and it fell to the bottom. She had tears in her eyes as she ran nervously to tell her stepmother what had happened. "Stupid girl," barked the stepmother angrily. "Now that you have dropped the spindle into the water, then you shall go in and get it out again." The little girl went back to the well. Her stepmother had made her so nervous that she didn't know what to do. Without thinking, she leaned over the well. Though she leaned too far and found herself tumbling head first down the well. She closed her eyes as she tumbled to the bottom. When she opened them again, she was surprised to find herself in a meadow full of flowers. The sun was shining brightly. The little girl walked across the meadow of flowers and came to a bakery. The big ovens were full of loaves of bread, and they called out to the little girl, "Pull us out of the oven, please, pull us out. We have been baked for long enough, and if you don't take us out, we will burn." "Of course," cried the sweet young girl. She took the oven gloves and pulled out the tray of loaves from the oven immediately. She carried on walking and came across an apple tree. The tree's branches were loaded with ripe apples, their weight pulling the branches downwards. "Shake me!" cried the tree. "My apples are ripe and ready to be picked." "I will," answered the girl, and she began to shake the tree vigorously. The apples began to rain down to the ground, and she didn't stop shaking until there was not a single apple left on the tree. Then she gathered them together into a heap and walked on. At last she came across a little cottage. In the doorway sat an old woman with teeth so large that the girl was frightened and turned to run away. The old woman called out to her, "Don't be afraid, child. Come and live here in my little cottage and take care of me. I promise that if you help around the house, then I will be kind to you. Although, please make sure to make my bed well. You must shake it well so that the feathers fly about. That way all of the children will see them and say that snowflakes are falling, for I am Old Mother Frost." The old woman spoke so kindly that the young girl immediately felt at ease. "I will happily work for you," she told the old woman. The girl was a hard worker, and each day she did her chores to perfection. She remembered what the old lady had told her about the bed, and each day she shook it so well that the flowers flew around like snowflakes. She was very happy with Mother Frost, who always spoke kindly to her and treated her well. After some time, though, she began to feel homesick. She could not help it, despite her life living with Mother Frost being a happy one. She decided to speak to Mother Frost about how she was feeling. "Dear Mother Frost," she began, "you have been so very kind to me, but I miss my friends. I would like to go home now and see them." "Of course, my dear," replied the old woman, "and as you have been so kind to me, I will show you the way myself." With that, she took the girl by the hand and led her to a great door which she opened. As the girl stepped through the doorway, a shower of gold came down and fell all around her. The gold stuck to her clothes so that she was covered in gold from her head down to her feet. "That is your payment for working so hard," said the old woman. "And here is your spindle that fell into the well," she added, handing it over to the young girl. The door then closed suddenly, and the girl found herself once more upon the earth, not far from her mother's house. As she came into the courtyard, the cockerel sat up and began to sing, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Our golden lady has come home too!" The girl went into the house, and upon seeing all of the gold, the stepmother was extremely kind to her. The young girl told her the story of falling down the well, meeting the old lady, and how she came to receive the gold. The stepmother could not wait for her own daughter to try the same thing. So this time she sent her own daughter down by the well to spin thread. But the girl was so lazy that she didn't spin fast enough to make her fingers bleed. So she pricked her finger on a thorn to get a drop of blood, and she wiped it on the spindle. Then she purposely let the spindle fall into the well and jumped in after it. She fell down and down before finding herself in a beautiful meadow, just as her stepsister had. She walked along the same path to the bakery. She heard the loaves shout, pull us out, or we will burn." "I will not," snorted the girl. "Your oven is too dirty." She continued on until she came to the apple tree. Shake me," cried the tree. "My apples are ripe for picking." "No chance," retorted the girl. "Some of your apples might fall on my head." She ambled along lazily. She soon stood in front of Mother Frost's house. Remembering what had happened to her stepsister, she had no fear of the old woman with the big teeth and walked straight up to her, offering to be her assistant. The girl was busy for a whole day. She did everything that Mother Frost asked her to. However, by the second day, she started to slow down and get lazy. By the third day, she was even worse. She would sleep late in the mornings and would never make the old woman's bed properly. She didn't shake it so that the feathers flew about. Mother Frost soon tired of the lazy girl and told her to go home. This was exactly what the girl wanted. She wanted to be taken to the great door and have the shower of gold fall down and cover her. Mother Frost led the child to the door, but as the girl passed through it, a tub of sticky black tar came raining down on top of her. "That is what you get for your work," said the old woman. The girl walked home covered in tar. When she got to the courtyard, the cockerel crowed, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Our sticky lady has come home too." The tar was stuck so fast to the girl that for as long as she lived, she never managed to get it off again. The night before Christmas. 'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. My sister and I were nestled all snug in our beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in our heads. And Mama in her pyjamas and Father in his cap had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the curtains and threw up the sash. The moon shining onto the new fallen snow gave the lustre of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a bright red sleigh and 8 bright-eyed reindeer, with a jolly old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his reindeer they came, as he whistled and shouted and called them by name. "Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all." As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle rising up in the sky, so up to the housetop the reindeers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. Then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each reindeer hoof. As I drew in my head, and was turning around. Down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in red, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry! His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His friendly mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon let me know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger on the side of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the seeds of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim before he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." The Ant and the Grasshopper. One hot summer afternoon, a grasshopper sat amongst the grass enjoying the sunshine. He'd spent the morning munching away happily on blades of grass, and now, feeling content with a full stomach, decided to make some merry music. He rubbed his back legs across his wings to make a humming sound. "Would you mind?" said a passing ant. "I'm trying to work, and that sound is really quite distracting." "Work?" replied the grasshopper in surprise. "Why on earth would you want to work on a lovely day like this?" "I've got food to move," answered the ant. The grasshopper looked more closely now and saw that the little ant was carrying a huge cake crumb on his back. "That looks like hard work," he said to the ant. "Oh, it is," said the ant. "I've got to get this crumb and many more like it back to our nest." "Whatever for?" asked the grasshopper, thinking of his full tummy. "There's plenty of food around for us not to go hungry." "Yes, now," said the ant. "But come winter, food will be scarce on the ground. Us ants always spend the summer preparing for the winter. It gives us great comfort to know that we will be well provided for when the cold weather sets in." "Oh, us grasshoppers don't do that," replied the grasshopper. "We know how to live for the moment. We enjoy the summer and the warm weather. We eat, sleep, make music, and enjoy life. Winter is ages away. There's no point in thinking about winter yet." He gave a snort of laughter. "Well, I'd better get on," said the ant, and began to march away carrying his load. "Oh, don't hurry away," said the grasshopper. "Stay and listen to my music for a while. Relax and enjoy the sunshine." "Oh, I'd better not," answered the ant. "My jobs won't finish themselves." With that, he moved away. The grasshopper, feeling more than a little put out, shouted after the ant, "Off you go then, you miserable ant! Why should I waste my time talking to you anyway? I've got more important things to be doing, such as eating this scrumptious grass and enjoying the sunshine." He carried on making music as the ant disappeared into the distance. Several months later, the sunshine gave way to cloud, the wind began to blow with a biting chill, and snow came falling to the ground. winter had arrived and it was cold. The grasshopper shivered. He was too cold to play his music, and food was so scarce that his empty tummy grumbled and complained. He spotted the ant walking by and called out to him. "Hey, ant!" he shouted. "Remember me? It's cold out today, isn't it?" "Not in our nest," replied the ant. "It's lovely and warm there." "But there isn't so much food about, is there?" continued the grasshopper. "We've got plenty," answered the ant. "Our storerooms are full. We have more than enough to see us through the winter." "Plenty?" wondered the grasshopper out loud. "Listen, ant, you wouldn't happen to have any crumbs going spare for a hungry grasshopper, would you?" "I thought you grasshoppers could look after yourselves," retorted the ant. "If I remember rightly, you called me miserable this last summer for being too busy to stop and listen to your music. If we'd all been too busy enjoying ourselves to think about preparing for the winter, then we would all be hungry now, just as you are. No, I'm sorry, grasshopper, but you had your chance back then to prepare for the cold weather, and you didn't take it." "Oh, come on," complained the grasshopper. "Help me out a bit here, please." The ant turned around and tutted as he walked away. "Sorry, grasshopper," he said, "but if you learn to save up on the days when you have plenty, then there will never be a day when you find yourself with nothing. Maybe now you will learn your lesson." With that, he carried on walking back to his warm nest with plentiful food, leaving the grasshopper behind to think over the ant's wise words. The Fox and the Stork. There once lived a fox who took great joy in playing tricks on the other animals. One day he thought of a plan to make fun of his friend Stork. Fox had always thought Stork's long legs and long bill were rather amusing, and he knew just the trick that he was going to play. "Come and have dinner at my house today, Stork," said Fox, hardly able to keep the smile from his face as he thought of the fun that he was going to have at Stork's expense. "I'll make us something really tasty and we'll have a wonderful time." "Thank you, Fox," replied Stork, thrilled. "I'd love to." Stork spent all day thinking about the wonderful food that Fox would serve up. His mouth was watering as he thought of all the delicious possibilities. That evening, Stork arrived at Fox's house in plenty of time. He was feeling very hungry as he had made sure to leave space for the scrumptious meal that his friend had promised. "Come on in," cried Fox. "Take a seat and dinner will soon be served." Stork sat down at the dining table as Fox busied himself in the kitchen, finishing off the first course. A few moments later, he swept into the room and laid 2 shallow bowls full of soup on the table. The smell was delicious, but the bowl was far too shallow for poor Stork's long beak. He could not get a drop of soup. The most that he could do was manage to wet the very tip of his beak. He was left hungry and very disappointed. Fox glanced up at his friend. "My dear friend Stork," he said mischievously, "I can't help but notice that you've hardly touched your soup. Was it not to your liking?" Stork rose graciously from his chair before answering very courteously. "Not at all, Fox. In fact, it was so very kind of you to have me for dinner that I must insist on returning the favour. Will you come and dine at my house next week?" "Certainly," replied Fox. The 2 friends agreed a date and a time, and Stork took his leave. He smiled politely at Fox as he waved goodbye, but inside he was fuming. "I'll show that trickster Fox," he muttered to himself. The following week, Fox turned up on Stork's doorstep and was greeted graciously by his host. "Do come in and sit down, Fox," said Stork as he showed his friend through the door and to the table. Fox chuckled to himself at the memory of Stork trying and failing to drink the soup from the shallow bowl. "I hope you've come hungry," said Stork as he brought 2 tall jars of fish stew to the table. Fox's mouth began to water as he breathed in the heavenly aroma. He leaned over and put his snout to the jar. He tried eagerly to lap up the sumptuous stew, but, dear me, do you know that Fox could not manage 1 bite of the stew? His snout was far too short to reach down the jar's long, narrow neck. He even tried to lift the jar up and pour, but it was too heavy for him. Stork had no problems reaching the food with his long beak, but Fox could reach no more than a couple of stray drops from around the rim of the jar. Stork ate up all the stew before pausing and asking his friend, "Oh, dear Fox, whatever is the matter? Did you not like the food?" "That's not fair," replied Fox gruffly. "What a dreadful trick to play on a friend! Now I shall starve." Stork smiled calmly as he answered, "Well, Fox, now you know. You should never play tricks if you can't accept the same treatment yourself." And with that, he served himself another tall jar of stew. Town Mouse and Country Mouse. Once upon a time, a town mouse decided to pay a visit to his cousin in the country. It had been a long time since the 2 mice had seen each other, and it would be fun to spend time together, thought Town Mouse. So he packed himself a little suitcase and set off for the countryside. Country Mouse lived in a little cottage built into a log on the edge of a farm. It was a simple home, but neat and cosy, just as Country Mouse liked it. When he heard a knock at the door, he was surprised and delighted to see his cousin standing there. Come in," he said to Town Mouse, and then shut the small wooden door behind them. "You must be hungry after your long journey," he said. "Let me find us something to eat." Country Mouse made himself busy, preparing supper for the 2 mice. When he eventually set the tray of food down on his little table, he said to Town Mouse, "I'm afraid it isn't much, just some acorns and a bit of cheese I found in the farmhouse this morning, but it should be enough to satisfy our tummies for tonight." Town Mouse was stunned by the light meal that his cousin had served. He nibbled at the food to be polite, but he couldn't resist telling tales of the piles of fruit, bread and cake that he regularly feasted on back in the town. "You must come back to the town with me," he said to his cousin. Country Mouse, whose mouth was watering with the thought of all that delicious food, agreed without hesitation. So the next day, the 2 mice set off through the woods and across fields until they came to the busy town. Before long, they arrived at the rather grand house where Town Mouse lived, and they scurried under the door. Town Mouse led his cousin straight to the kitchen, where they found an array of food all laid out on the table. There were crackers and biscuits, cheese, jams and chutneys, meat, pastries and fruit. The 2 little mice immediately began to tuck into the feast. Delicious," sighed Country Mouse contentedly between mouthfuls. "I don't think I will ever go back home." But just then the cat of the house pushed the door, meowing loudly. "Quick!" shouted Town Mouse, "this way!" And he grabbed Country Mouse by the paw and the two scampered away to safety down a mouse hole. Country Mouse was shaking. "We were nearly eaten," he said. "Ridiculous," answered Town Mouse. "Now follow me and let me show you a real feast." He took his cousin to the dining room where the table was heaving with food. The two mice jumped up to the table and began nibbling, and Country Mouse soon forgot how scared he had been just minutes before. It wasn't long, however, before the door opened and the lady of the house came in, followed by a big dog. The dog spotted the mice and immediately ran over to the table barking. When the lady saw the mice up on the table, she screamed and began to swat at them with the wooden spoon that she'd been carrying in her hand. When the mice were safely back in Town Mouse's mouse hole, Country Mouse picked up his jacket and his little suitcase and turned to his cousin. "I'm afraid it's time for me to leave," he said. "There are many luxuries here in the town, but it's far too dangerous for me. I know that my life in the countryside is simple, and I may not have as many delicious things to eat, but I would much rather have peace and quiet than live every day in fear." And with that, Country Mouse thanked Town Mouse and hugged him goodbye, before heading happily back to his peaceful little house in the country. The Wizard of Oz. Many years ago, in a place called Kansas, a little girl called Dorothy lived with her aunt, uncle, and their dog Toto. One day, Dorothy was playing outside in the garden with Toto when the sky suddenly darkened. The wind began to blow, thunder clattered, and lightning flashed. It was a cyclone. "Aunt! Uncle!" cried Dorothy loudly, but there was no reply. Dorothy ran inside and hid herself in her room together with Toto. The wind was blowing so strongly that it pulled the house from the ground and sent it up into the sky, flying round and round until finally the strong wind began to subside and the house came crashing back down to the ground. Cautiously, Dorothy and Toto opened the front door. The air was calm now and the sky was bright, but Dorothy could see immediately that they were no longer in Kansas. They were surrounded by bright green grass and tiny little houses. There was also a long path made out of yellow bricks. "Hello, child," said a warm voice. Dorothy startled and turned to see a kindly-looking lady with long fair hair and wearing a dusty pink dress and a silver crown upon her head. She introduced herself as the Good Witch. "Where am I?" asked Dorothy nervously. "This is the land of Oz," answered the Good Witch. "Thank you for killing the Wicked Witch." "Oh, I'm afraid there must be some mistake," replied Dorothy. "I haven't killed anybody, and I've never even heard of the Wicked Witch." The Good Witch turned and pointed to where a pair of legs in stripy tights and sparkly red shoes lay underneath Dorothy's house. She explained how the house had landed on the Wicked Witch and killed her. "It's quite all right," said the Good Witch, upon noticing the shock on Dorothy's face. "The Wicked Witch was a terribly bad person, and you've done a favour to us all by landing your house on top of her. Now she can cause no more harm. Please do not be afraid." She pointed to the ruby red slippers and explained that they now belonged to Dorothy. "They're magic slippers," she said. Dorothy had no interest whatsoever in magic slippers. All she wanted was to get back home to Kansas with her aunt and uncle. She longed to feel safe again. "How do I get home?" she asked the Good Witch. "Follow the yellow brick road to the Emerald City," answered the Good Witch. "When you get there, Ask to see the wizard. He'll be able to get you back home." Dorothy and Toto set off along the yellow brick road in search of the wizard's palace. After some time, Dorothy heard a voice speak out. "I say, hello there," said the voice. Dorothy looked around. She could see nobody around and had no idea where the voice could be coming from. "I said, hello there," said the voice again. Dorothy turned and saw a scarecrow standing in a cornfield by the side of the road. Surely the scarecrow could not be talking to her. She'd never in her life heard of a talking scarecrow. Yet there was nobody else around. "Hi," came the voice again, and this time Dorothy saw the scarecrow's lips move. "It's so terribly uncomfortable on this pole. Would you please help me down?" Dorothy could hardly believe it. The scarecrow could talk. Hurriedly, she helped him down from his pole. "Thanks," said the scarecrow. "Where are you going?" Dorothy hurriedly explained about the cyclone and the floating house and how she'd landed on the Wicked Witch. "I'm off to find the Wizard of Oz," she explained. "He'll be able to help me get home." "Well, if he can help you get home, maybe he can give me a brain," answered the scarecrow. "I'd love to be a great thinker, but have only straw in my head. I would love to have a brain. Maybe I'll join you on your trip to Oz." Dorothy said that of course he could come along with her to the Emerald City and look for the wizard. So the two of them carried on along the yellow brick road, with Toto running along behind them. They hadn't gone much further when they heard a loud clanking noise. It was a rusty old tin man who was standing by the side of the road. He was unable to walk as his joints were so rusty. Dorothy took a little can and added some drops of oil to the tin man's mouth so that he could speak. "Thank you," exclaimed the tin man. "I'm so rusty because I've been unable to stop crying. You see, I'm so sad because I have no heart. I would do anything to have a heart." Dorothy quickly added more oil to the poor tin man's joints so that the creaking and clanking would stop and he would be able to move more easily. She told him all about their trip to the Emerald City in search of the wizard, who would be able to send her home and give the scarecrow a brain. "Well," said the tin man, "if the wizard can send you home and he can find a brain for the scarecrow, then I'm sure he must be able to give me a heart." "You're right," answered Dorothy. "I'm sure the Wizard of Oz will be able to do that for you. You must come along with us." The tin man joined Dorothy, Toto and the scarecrow, and they continued down the yellow brick road. As they walked further, they heard a whimpering sound. They looked and saw a lion curled up into a little ball. The lion was trembling with fear. "My goodness!" exclaimed Dorothy. "What has happened to you?" A mouse," answered the lion. "A mouse bit me on my tail and I'm too afraid to fight back." "Oh dear," said Dorothy. "It seems to me, dear lion, that what you need is a little bit of courage. We're on our way to the Emerald City to find the Wizard of Oz. Why don't you come with us? I'm sure that he could find some courage for you." She hurriedly explained about her wish to go home to Kansas, the scarecrow's need for a brain, and the tin man's wish for a heart. "I'll join you," said the lion, and the four friends continued their journey. Little did they know, but they were being watched. Dorothy didn't realise this, but her house had landed on top of the Wicked Witch of the East. But the Wicked Witch of the East had a sister, the Wicked Witch of the West, and she was furious that Dorothy had killed her sister. She also wanted her sister's ruby slippers back. Through her magical crystal ball, she watched Dorothy and her new friends make their way towards the Emerald City. She called for her flying monkey soldiers to capture Dorothy. Meanwhile, Dorothy and her friends came across a field of poppies. In the middle was a large tree. The tree's roots reached out and tangled everyone except for the Tin Man. The Tin Man was brave and quickly lashed out with the powerful axe that he was carrying. He hacked and chopped at the strong tree roots and soon managed to free his companions. After crossing the field, the group came to a wide river. There was no boat in which to climb, and the water was quite rough. "Climb onto my back," ordered the Scarecrow. "I am made of straw and wood and can float. I'll get you across the river." The others did as the Scarecrow said and jumped onto his back. It wasn't easy to say the least, but eventually they all made it across the river and reached Emerald City. They were just heading to the palace when a group of the Wicked Witch's flying monkeys flew at them and surrounded them. They had nowhere to escape. The monkeys captured them and flew them to the Wicked Witch, dropping them at her feet. The Scarecrow noticed that the Wicked Witch was wearing a small vial attached to a chain around her neck. The witch shook angrily. "You!" she screamed at Dorothy. "You killed my sister! I'll make you pay for that! Give me back those ruby slippers!" Dorothy did not want to give anything to the Wicked Witch, so when the witch lunged forwards at her, Dorothy fought back as bravely as she could. She managed to pull herself away from the witch's grasp. She picked up a nearby bucket to defend herself. The bucket was heavy with water, so Dorothy threw it over the witch. Suddenly, the witch began to cry and groan. The water was making her melt and disappear. Soon she was nothing more than a puddle on the floor. Only the necklace and the vial remained. Out of the vial popped the Wizard of Oz himself. The wizard thanked Dorothy profusely for saving him and ridding Oz of yet another wicked witch. He was so grateful that he promised to grant them any wish they desired. The Scarecrow got his brain, the Tin Man got his heart, and the lion was rewarded with courage. When Dorothy asked to go home, the wizard told her that he could not help her. He explained that Dorothy held the power in the ruby red shoes. All she needed to do was wear the shoes and click her heels together 3 times to be taken anywhere she wished. It was time for Dorothy and Toto to leave. She said a tearful goodbye to her new friends and clicked the shoes together as she'd been told. Immediately she found herself back in Kansas with her aunt and uncle in their cosy home, as if none of this adventure had ever happened. Dorothy was delighted to be home, but knew that she would never forget the new friends that she had made in Oz. The Wolf and the 5 Little Goats. There was once a mother goat who had 5 little kids. One day the mother goat was going to the forest to gather some wood for her fire. "Now, my little kids," she said, "you must be very careful while I am away. Lock the door behind me and do not open it to anybody until I return. If the wicked wolf should get in, he would certainly eat you." The little kids promised they would be careful, and then their mother set off for the forest, and as soon as she had gone, they locked the door behind her. Now, it so happened the old wolf was out prowling that day. He saw the mother goat trotting away toward the forest, and as soon as she was out of sight, he crept down to the house and knocked at the door. Rap, tap, tap. "Who's there?" called the little kids within. "It is I, your mother, my dears," answered the wolf in his great rough voice. "Open the door and let me in." But the kids were very clever little kids. "No, no, they cried. "You are not our mother. Our mother has a soft, sweet voice, and your voice is harsh and rough. You must be the wolf." When the wolf heard this, he was very angry. He battered and battered at the door, but they would not let him in. Then he turned and galloped away as fast as he could until he came to a dairy. There he stuck his head in at the window, and the woman had just finished churning her butter. "Woman, woman," cried the wolf, "give me some butter. If you do not, I will come in and upset your churn." The woman was frightened. At once she gave him a great deal of butter, all he could eat. The wolf swallowed it down, and then he ran back to the goat's house and knocked at the door. Rat-tat-tat! "Who is there?" asked the little goats within. "Your mother, my dears," answered the wolf, and now his voice was very soft and smooth because of the butter that he had swallowed. "It is our mother," cried the little kids, and they were about to open the door, but the littlest kid of all, who was very wise, stopped them. "Wait a moment," he said. "It sounds like our mother's voice, but before we open the door, we had better be very, very sure it is not the wolf." Then he called through the door, "Put your paws up on the windowsill." The wolf suspected nothing. He put his paws up on the windowsill, and as soon as the little kids saw them, they knew at once that it was not their mother. "No, no," they cried, "you are not our mother. Our mother has pretty white feet, and your feet are as black as soot. You must be the wolf." When the wolf heard this, he was angrier than ever. He turned and galloped away again, and as he galloped, he growled to himself and gnashed his teeth. Soon he came to a baker's shop, and there he stuck his head in at the window. "Baker, baker, give me some flour," he cried. "If you do not, I will upset your pans and spoil your baking." The baker was frightened. At once he gave the wolf all the flour he wanted. The wolf took it and ran away with it. He ran until he came to the goat's house. There he sat down and covered his black feet all over with the white flour, and then he knocked at the door. Rat-tat-tat! "Who's there?" cried the little goats within. "Your mother, my dears, come home again," answered the wolf in his smooth, buttery voice. "Put your paws up on the windowsill." The wolf put his paws up on the windowsill, and they looked quite white because of the flour. Then the little kids felt sure it was their mother, and they gladly opened the door. In bounded the wicked wolf. The little goats cried out, and away they ran, some in one direction and some in another. They hid themselves, one behind the door, and one in the dough trough, and one in the wash tub, and one under the bed, and one, and he was the littlest one of all, hid in the tall clock case. The wolf stood there glaring about him, but he could not see a single one of them. Then he began to hunt about for them, but he was in a hurry because he was afraid that the mother goat would come home again. He found the kid behind the door, and he was in such a hurry he swallowed it whole without hurting it in the least. He found the one in the wash tub, and he swallowed it whole too. He found the one in the dough trough, and it too he swallowed whole. He found the one under the bed, and he swallowed it whole. The only one he did not find was the one in the clock case, and he never thought of looking there. He hunted around, and he was afraid to stay any longer in case their mother came home. By now the old wolf felt very heavy and sleepy. he looked around for a place to go in order to lie down and rest. Not far away were some rocks and trees. Here the wolf stretched himself out, and soon he was snoring so loudly that the leaves of the trees shook overhead. Soon after this, the mother goat came home. As soon as she saw the door of the house standing open, she knew at once that something bad had happened. She went in and looked around her. The furniture was all tipped up and scattered about the room. "My dear little kids," cried the mother, "the wicked wolf has certainly been here and eaten them all." "He didn't eat me," said a little voice in the clock case. The mother goat opened the door of the clock case, and the littlest kid of all hopped out. "But why were you in the clock case? And what has happened?" asked the mother. Then the little kid told her all about how the wolf had come there with his buttery voice and his whitened paws, and how they had let him in, and how he had swallowed all 4 of the other little kids so that he alone was left. After the mother goat had heard the story, she went to the door and looked about. Then she heard the old wolf snoring where he lay asleep under the trees in the shade of the rocks. "That must be the old wolf snoring," said the mother goat, "and he cannot be far away. Do not make a noise, my little kid, but come with me." The mother goat crept over to the heap of rocks, and the little kid followed her on tiptoes. She peeped down, and there lay the old wolf, fast asleep. "Now, my little kid," whispered the mother, "run straight home again as fast as you can, and fetch me my scissors and a needle and some strong thread." The little kid did as his mother said, and he ran so softly over the grass that not even a mouse could have heard him. As soon as he returned, the mother goat crept up to the old wolf, and with the sharp scissors she slit the wolf's tummy open like a sack. Out popped one little kid, and out popped another little kid, and another, and another, and there they all were, safe and sound. And all this while the wolf carried on sleeping and snoring. "And now, my little kids," whispered the mother, "each one of you shall bring me a round stone, but be very quick and quiet." So the little kids ran away and hunted around, and each brought their mother back a big round stone, and they were very quick and very quiet about it, just as their mother had asked them to be. The mother goat put the stones inside the wolf and then sewed his tummy back up using the strong thread. After that, she and the little kids hid themselves behind the rocks and watched and waited. Soon the old wolf yawned and opened his eyes. Then he got up and shook himself, and when he did so, the stones inside him rattled together so that the goat and the little kids could hear them where they hid behind the rocks. Oh dear me," groaned the wolf. "What is so heavy and rattles against my poor bones? Not little goats, I fear, but only big stones." Now, what with the stones inside of him and the hot sun overhead, the wolf grew very thirsty. Nearby was a deep well, with water almost up to the top of it. The old wolf went to drink. He leaned over, and all the stones rolled up to his head, and he lost his balance. Plump! He went down into the water, and the stones carried him straight to the bottom. He could not swim at all, and so he was drowned. All the little kids ran out from behind the rocks and began to dance around the well. "The old wolf is dead, hurrah, hurrah, the old wolf is dead, hurrah," they sang. and the mother goat came and danced with them. They were all so delighted.